Hey there, welcome to Dread Lullabies. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. You know, they say the night is for resting, but for some, the darkness is where the real world begins. Tonight, I've put together a few true stories that are meant to be heard in the quiet. Stories that remind us that sometimes the things that go bump in the night are more real than we'd like to believe. Before we get lost in the dark, I'd love to know where you're joining me from. So feel free to drop a comment and tell me where you're listening tonight. And if you find yourself coming back for more, maybe consider liking the video and subscribing. It really helps me keep these lullabies going for you. So, pull up the covers, get comfortable, and let's see what the night has in store for us.
This experience has stayed with me for a long time, not because it was frightening in the usual sense, but because it was so strange and hard to pin down. Even now, when I think about it, my first reaction isn't fear, it's curiosity. It felt like one of those moments where there had to be a logical, scientific explanation hiding somewhere, just out of reach. Nothing about it felt threatening, and I never felt in danger. Still, it was unsettling enough that it lodged itself firmly in my memory, and I still think about it every now and then. At the time, I was working at a grocery store. It was a pretty normal job, nothing special or unusual about it. The store itself was just like any other grocery store you've probably been in. Fluorescent lights, long aisles, the constant background noise of carts rolling, scanners beeping, and people talking. I worked shifts that involved a lot of repetitive tasks, and one of my regular duties was stocking milk in the dairy cooler. If you've ever been inside one of those dairy coolers, you know exactly what they're like. They're large, enclosed rooms, much colder than the rest of the store. The air is heavy and chilly, and there's a constant low hum coming from the cooling units. The walls are metal, the floor is usually concrete, and sound behaves a little differently in there. Voices echo slightly. Small noises carry farther than you expect. At the same time, the steady mechanical noise kind of blankets everything, making the space feel isolated from the rest of the store. I was in the cooler doing my usual routine, pulling out crates of milk, stacking cartons, rotating stock, all of it done almost on autopilot. It was the kind of task where your body keeps moving but your mind drifts. I wasn't thinking about anything important. I was just working. While I was in there, my phone rang. Back then, my ringtone was Rick Ross's song, Hustlin'. It was loud, clear, and very recognizable. There was no confusing it with anything else. The moment it played, you knew exactly what it was. I reached into my pocket, answered the phone, and talked for a bit. It wasn't a long conversation, just a normal call. When it ended, I hung up, put my phone back in my pocket, and went right back to stacking milk. Everything felt completely normal. For a few minutes, nothing out of the ordinary happened. I was just working, listening to the hum of the cooler, moving crates around. Then, while I was still focused on my task, I heard my ringtone again. At first, my brain didn't even register it as strange. My immediate assumption was that my phone was ringing again. That's just what made sense. But almost immediately after that thought, something felt off. I didn't feel my phone vibrating in my pocket. Normally, I could always feel it, especially in a quiet space like the cooler. I stopped what I was doing and checked my phone. There was nothing there. No incoming call, no missed call, no notification. The screen was dark and normal. I stood there for a second, confused but not alarmed yet. Phones do weird things sometimes. Maybe it had glitched for a moment. Maybe I imagined it. That's what I told myself. But then I realized the sound hadn't stopped. The music was still there. It wasn't loud like my ringtone usually was. It was faint, distant, almost like it was being played from far away or bleeding through walls. The sound seemed muffled, softened by distance, but it was unmistakably the same song, the same rhythm, the same looping phrase. It kept repeating quietly, over and over again. I just stood there, frozen, listening. The longer I listened, the more uncomfortable I felt. The sound didn't seem to be coming from any specific direction. It wasn't louder near one wall or quieter near another. It felt like it was just present, like it was woven into the background noise of the cooler itself. My first real thought was that something might be wrong with me. Maybe my brain was replaying the sound because I had just heard it. The human brain is strange like that. Sometimes you hear a song once and it gets stuck in your head, playing over and over without you meaning it to. Maybe this was something like that, triggered by the monotony of the job and the constant hum of the machines. But it didn't feel like a song stuck in my head. It felt external. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, and I definitely didn't want to assume anything weird was happening without checking. So I decided to get a second opinion. I called over a buddy of mine who also worked there. I didn't explain what was going on over the phone. I just told him I needed him to come into the dairy cooler for a minute. When he came in, I tried to act normal. I didn't tell him what to listen for. I didn't want to put the idea in his head. I just stood there with him, pretending to organize milk while we listened. At first, he didn't hear anything. For a brief moment, I felt embarrassed. I thought maybe I really was just imagining it. Maybe the sound had stopped and my brain was filling in the gap. I almost laughed it off. Then, after a little while, he went quiet. He tilted his head slightly like he was focusing on something. His expression changed. He looked at me and asked what that sound was. My stomach dropped. He heard it too. That was the moment when it stopped being just my problem. Someone else was hearing the same strange sound in the same place without being told what to expect. We stood there together, listening to this faint loop of my ringtone playing somewhere in the background of the cooler. We started trying to figure out where it could be coming from. The dairy cooler had a large cooling unit built into it. Big fans, motors, metal panels, all of it constantly running. Sound bounced around in odd ways. We checked nearby areas to see if someone had left a radio on, or if there was a phone playing music somewhere close by. There was nothing. No speakers, no music in the adjacent rooms, nothing that made sense. The sound continued, fading in and out slightly, but never fully disappearing. At that point, curiosity took over. I wanted to know how widespread this was. I wanted to know if other people could hear it too, or if it was just me and him. So for the rest of my shift, I started pulling other coworkers into the dairy cooler one by one. I was careful about how I did it. I didn't tell them what they were supposed to hear. I didn't say anything about music or ringtones. I just asked them to come stand in the cooler with me for a minute, usually under the excuse of helping me with something. Then, after a bit of silence, I'd casually ask if they noticed anything strange. The responses were all over the place. Roughly 60% of the people said they heard something odd. They couldn't always describe it clearly, but they said it didn't sound like normal machinery noise. Some said it felt rhythmic. Others said it sounded like something repeating. About 20% of them went a step further. They said they heard music. A few of those people, without any prompting from me, said it sounded like a song. One or two even mentioned that it felt like the same part was looping over and over again. The rest heard nothing at all. To them, the cooler sounded exactly the same as it always did. That variation is what made the whole thing even stranger. If everyone had heard it, it might have been easier to blame on some kind of mechanical issue or hidden sound source. If only I had heard it, I could have dismissed it as something in my head. But this uneven split made it harder to explain away completely. The sound persisted for hours. It wasn't constant in volume. Sometimes it was more noticeable, sometimes barely there. There were moments when it felt like it was coming from everywhere at once, not from any specific point in the room. It was like the sound was embedded in the air itself. By the end of my shift, I was exhausted. Not physically, but mentally. I had spent hours trying to analyze something that refused to make sense. When I went home, I was still thinking about it, replaying the sound in my mind, wondering if I would hear it again. The next morning, I swear I heard it briefly, but by then, I don't fully trust that memory. I had been thinking about it so much that my brain could easily have filled in the sound on its own. Once something like that gets into your head, it's hard to tell where perception ends and imagination begins. Ever since then, I've thought about possible explanations. One idea is auditory pareidolia. That's when the brain tries to find patterns in random noise. The human brain is incredibly good at doing that. The constant hum of the cooler combined with fans and vibrations, could have created complex sound patterns that some brains interpreted as music. Once you've heard something specific, like a ringtone, your brain might latch onto similar rhythms and turn them into something familiar. Another possibility involves the electrical systems in the cooler. Large cooling units use powerful motors and create electromagnetic fields. It's not impossible that some kind of interference could have picked up a faint radio signal or produced harmonic frequencies that resembled the rhythm of the song. That might explain why the sound was faint and looping, and why it didn't have the full clarity of real music. But even that doesn't fully explain why some people heard music clearly. Some heard something odd, and others heard nothing at all. The fact that multiple people heard it without being told what to listen for is the part that keeps me from completely dismissing it. At the same time, it never felt paranormal. It didn't feel like something watching us or trying to communicate. It felt mechanical, environmental, like the space itself was doing something strange to sound and perception. Well, looking back now, I can smile about it. At the time, it was confusing and a little unsettling, but it was also fascinating. It turned an otherwise boring grocery store shift into something memorable. We joked about it afterward, calling it the haunted dairy cooler or the hustlin' fridge. I still don't know exactly what caused it. Maybe there is a perfectly reasonable scientific explanation involving sound waves, resonance, electrical interference, and how different brains interpret the same stimulus differently. Maybe it was a combination of all of that happening at just the right moment. All I know is that for a few hours in that grocery store, a group of us stood in a cold dairy cooler listening to a ghost of a ringtone that wasn't actually playing anywhere. And honestly, for a grocery store shift, that was kind of fun. When I was around 11 or 12 years old, I went on a vacation to Ohio. At that age, trips like that felt huge to me, like stepping into a different world, even though it was still the same country. Everything felt unfamiliar in a quiet way. Different streets, different houses, different trees, and a different feeling in the air. I remember being excited mostly because it meant being outside a lot, staying up later than usual, and having freedom that I didn't normally have at home. Most of the days were simple and fun. We spent time outside, talked, laughed, and did what kids that age usually do when they're together. One evening, a group of us were outside playing a game, something like tag. Nothing organized, just running around, hiding, chasing each other, shouting, and laughing. I'm the kind of game where the rules change every 5 minutes and no one really cares. As the evening went on, the sky started to change. It wasn't sudden, but you could feel it. The light slowly faded, and the colors shifted from bright to muted. The sun had gone down, and that deep blue tone began to settle over everything. The air felt cooler, and the shadows stretched longer across the ground. Normally, that kind of transition felt calm, even nice. But that night, there was something different about it that I couldn't put my finger on at the time. Someone pointed out the moon. It was a full moon, bright and clear, hanging low in the sky. It was one of those moons that feels unusually big, like it's closer than normal. We all stopped running for a moment and looked up at it. I remember thinking it was really cool, almost unreal, on the way it lit everything around us with that pale glow. The ground looked different under moonlight, sharper in some places, softer in others. Then things changed fast. Out of nowhere, a huge mass of gray clouds rolled in and covered the moon. It wasn't gradual. One moment the moon was there, clear and bright, and the next it was swallowed up almost completely. The light dropped instantly, like someone had turned off a switch. The area around us felt darker in a way that wasn't normal for early night. Right after that, we heard it. A howl. It wasn't close enough to feel like it was right on top of us, but it wasn't distant either. It echoed through the air in a way that made my stomach tighten immediately. It wasn't the kind of sound you hear every day. It wasn't a dog barking or a random noise you could laugh off. It was long, or drawn out and chilling. The kind of sound that makes you stop breathing for a second without realizing it. The moment the howl stopped, everything felt wrong. No one laughed. No one made a joke. No one tried to explain it away right away. We were all quiet, standing there, listening. waiting to hear if it would happen again. I remember my heart pounding in my chest, the kind of fast, heavy pounding you feel when fear hits before logic has time to catch up. That's when we saw it. About 100 feet away from us, standing out against the darker background, was a large black figure. It wasn't moving. It wasn't running or charging or doing anything dramatic. It was just there, still. Solid. Dark enough that it didn't reflect any of the little light that was left. I couldn't make out clear details, but I could tell one thing for sure. It was big. Bigger than a person should have looked from that distance. Bigger than anything I was used to seeing outside at night. Its shape didn't feel right. Even without knowing exactly what it was, my brain immediately rejected it as something normal. It didn't fit into any category that made me feel safe. Time felt strange in that moment. I don't know how long we stood there looking at it. It could have been a few seconds or longer. Fear stretches time in a weird way. Everything slows down, but your thoughts race. My mind started filling in gaps with the worst possibilities. Every scary story I'd ever heard, every movie scene, every warning about the dark all came rushing in at once. I remember thinking that it felt like the thing was watching us. I don't know if it actually was. I don't know if it even had eyes that I could see. But the feeling was there, strong and immediate. That sense of being noticed, of being seen, of being small. Someone finally spoke. I don't remember who or what they said. I just remember the tension breaking all at once as fear turned into action. We ran. Not in an organized way, just instinctively, turning and sprinting back toward safety, back toward light, back toward adults and houses and places that felt normal. No one looked back. We didn't stop until we were inside. Doors were closed. Lights were turned on. People started talking all at once, trying to make sense of what we'd just seen and heard. Some said it was probably just an animal. Others tried to laugh it off, saying we were imagining things, that the darkness was messing with us. But no one sounded convincing. I didn't say much. I just listened, still feeling that tightness in my chest. My hands were shaking slightly, and I couldn't get rid of the image of that dark figure standing there, silent and unmoving. Even when people tried to explain it away, the explanations didn't stick. They didn't settle the fear. They felt thin, like excuses instead of answers. That night, I couldn't relax. Every sound outside made me tense up. The wind moving through trees sounded louder than it should have. Distant noises felt closer. I kept thinking about the howl, replaying it in my head, wondering what could make a sound like that. I kept thinking about the clouds covering the moon so suddenly, like the night itself had shifted. The rest of the trip, I stayed inside once it started getting dark. I didn't go out to play anymore in the evenings. I didn't want to be outside when the light faded. During the day, everything felt fine again, normal, safe. But as soon as evening came, that memory crept back in. The image of the moon disappearing, the sound of the howl, the shape of that figure in the distance. Even now, years later, I still think about it sometimes. I've tried to explain it to myself logically. Ohio has wildlife. Animals make strange noises. Shadows can play tricks on your eyes, especially when the light changes suddenly. Fear can exaggerate things, especially when you're young and surrounded by other kids who are also scared. All of that makes sense. But there's still a part of me that remembers how real it felt, how immediate the fear was, how instinctive the reaction to run was. Fear like that doesn't come from imagination alone. It comes from something deep, something old, on something that tells you to get away before your brain finishes asking questions. I don't claim to know what we saw that night. I don't say it was something supernatural. I don't say it was a monster or anything out of a story. I just know that in that moment, under that darkened sky, with the moon hidden and that howl echoing through the air, whatever stood out there felt wrong. And that feeling stayed with me. Sometimes it's not the clearest memories that stick the longest. It's the ones with missing details, the ones your mind keeps circling back to, trying to fill in the blanks. That night in Ohio became one of those memories for me. Not because it was the most dramatic or terrifying thing that ever happened, but because it was just enough. Just enough fear. Just enough mystery. After that, I understood something without being able to put it into words yet. The world feels different at night. And sometimes, when the light disappears too quickly, and the air goes quiet in the wrong way, your instincts know something before your mind does. I didn't play outside again for the rest of that trip. And even now, when I hear a howl at night or see clouds roll over a full moon too fast, I feel that same tightness in my chest. And I remember exactly how it felt to be a kid standing in the dark, staring at something I couldn't explain. I want to be clear from the start that I didn't believe in any of it. Not really. I work as a lightboard operator for my high school theater, and I'm studying to become a lighting designer. Theater people love stories. We romanticize everything. Broken equipment becomes temperamental. Missed cues become the space acting up. So when people said our theater was haunted, I always assumed it was just another excuse, another tradition, another way to dodge responsibility when something went wrong. The story everyone told was always the same. Years before I ever stepped into the booth, there had been a lighting student who supposedly died and now haunted the theater. Some people claimed he fell from the grid. Others said he slipped on the catwalk. The more dramatic versions made it sound like some tragic theater curse. Oh, but when you actually dug into it, the truth was a lot less theatrical. He had died of cancer. It was awful, but it had nothing to do with the theater itself. That alone made me skeptical. Still, the tradition stuck. There was a small plaque in the theater with his name on it, and before shows, some students would tap it or whisper "thank you" as they passed. They said it was respectful. They said it kept the lights from acting up. I never did it consistently. Sometimes I forgot. Sometimes I rolled my eyes and walked past it without a second thought. Back then, I didn't think that mattered. Freshman year was when everything changed. It was the first show I had ever been allowed to run the lightboard for. Not just assist, not shadow someone, actually run it. I was proud, but terrified. Lighting isn't just about pressing buttons. It's timing, precision, trust. If you mess up, everyone sees it. You can ruin a scene, pull focus from an actor, or leave someone standing in darkness. I remember how nervous I was that night. My hands felt too big for the console. Every button suddenly looked identical. The stage manager could tell I was on edge and kept reassuring me. He told me not to worry, that he would manage all my cues for me, calling them out one by one so I could focus on execution instead of memorization. The first night went fine. The second night started fine too. About 30 minutes into the show, though, I noticed the stage manager's expression change. He was standing beside me, headset on, watching the stage like always, but his jaw tightened. His eyes flicked up toward the ceiling, toward the back of the house. I asked him what was wrong. He didn't answer right away. He just listened to his headset for a second, then frowned harder. Finally, he told me the spotlight operators were saying someone was up there with them. That got my attention. Our auditorium is set up in a very specific way. The catwalk where the spotlight operators stand is only accessible by a single ladder. That ladder is inside a storage closet in a hallway backstage. On show nights, that hallway is blocked off. No one is supposed to be back there except authorized crew. On top of that, the spot operators lock the door behind them once they climb up. There is no second entrance. There is no secret passage. So, when the spot crew said someone was up there, it didn't sound like a joke. At first, we all assumed the same thing. Some idiot had snuck back there, maybe a student. Maybe someone messing around. But the more we listened to them on the headset, the more uneasy it became. They sounded genuinely scared. Not playful, not dramatic. Scared. Someone suggested maybe a serial killer had broken in. I know that sounds extreme, but in that moment, when you're responsible for students' safety and you're hearing fear in their voices, your brain jumps to worst-case scenarios. One of the spot operators said he was going to look around. We told him not to, but he insisted. He said he'd just take a quick look and see if someone was messing with them. He clicked off the headset. A minute passed, then 2. Then the spot crew stopped responding entirely. We checked the comm system. It was working. We could hear static. We could hear other crew, but not them. We tried texting them. Nothing. We tried calling their phones. Nothing. That's when the director decided to go up and check on them personally. He told us to hold the show steady and not panic. He disappeared into the blocked-off hallway and climbed the ladder. 5 minutes passed. He didn't come back. Now we were really uneasy. The show was still going on. Actors were still performing, completely unaware of what was happening above them. The audience was still watching, laughing, clapping. And meanwhile, we had lost contact with 3 students and an adult. We decided to send the sound guy next. He had a long break before his next cue, and he was calm under pressure. He grabbed his headset, told us he'd be right back, and followed the director up. 5 more minutes passed. Still nothing. No director. No sound guy. No spot operators. At this point, the booth was silent except for the low hum of equipment. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. I kept glancing at the light board, terrified I would miss a cue while also terrified of what might be happening overhead. Then it happened. Every single stage light went out at once. Not a blackout cue. Not a power flicker. Everything went dark. The stage, the house, the booth lights. Everything except the glow of emergency exit signs. The audience gasped. Actors froze mid-scene. For a split second, there was total silence. Then, slowly, the lights came back on. Not the way they were supposed to. They came on in random patches. Some at full intensity, some at half. Some in colors that were never programmed into that cue. Lights I had not touched. Lights that should not have been active at all. I didn't move. I didn't touch the board. The stage manager looked at me and said my name, on sharp and urgent, asking what I did. I told him I hadn't done anything. And I swear to this day, I hadn't. Before anyone could react, the lights snapped back to exactly where they were supposed to be. The correct cue, the correct intensity, the correct timing, as if someone had manually reset everything to perfection. The audience laughed nervously, assuming it was part of the show. The actors recovered and kept going. In the booth, none of us were laughing. The headset crackled. A voice came through. It was one of the spot operators. He sounded shaken, breathless. He said they were okay. He said there was no one up there. He said the director and sound guy were standing right beside him and had no idea what we were talking about. They came back down a few minutes later, all of them, together. When we asked them what happened, well, none of their answers lined up with what we experienced. The director said he went up, saw the spot crew sitting exactly where they were supposed to be, and asked what the problem was. They told him they thought someone had been behind them, but when they looked, no one was there. The sound guy said the same thing. None of them remembered losing contact. None of them remembered the lights going out. None of them remembered seeing anyone else. The spot operators swore they heard footsteps and felt someone brush past them. One of them said he felt a hand on his shoulder. Another said a light suddenly moved on its own. And here's the part that finally broke me. When the blackout happened, the light board log showed activity, commands being executed, manual overrides, from inputs that weren't assigned to any operator. And I checked it 3 times. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a programming error. Someone or something had run the lights. After the show ended, as we were packing up, the stage manager walked past the plaque and stopped. He tapped it gently and whispered, "Thank you." I didn't laugh this time. I stopped too. And for the first time, I did the same. Nothing like that has ever happened again. Not to that extent. But since then, I never forget the plaque. I never walk past it without acknowledging it. Not because I'm convinced it's a ghost, not because I have proof of anything supernatural, but because I learned something that night. Theater is a place built on trust. Trust in your crew, trust in your cues, trust in the space. And sometimes, when everything that should be impossible lines up just wrong, you realize how little control you actually have. I still study lighting. I still love the technical side. But now, when someone says the theater is haunted, I don't roll my eyes anymore. I just listen. This actually happened to me 2 days ago, and even now, my body still reacts when I replay it in my head. It wasn't paranormal, and it wasn't some unexplained mystery in the end, but it was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had because of how real the danger felt in the moment. It shook my sense of safety in a way I didn't expect, and I don't think I'll forget it anytime soon. My boyfriend had come to visit me for the weekend. I'm in school, and I live with my grandpa in his house. At the time, my grandpa was out of town visiting my aunt for the weekend, so the house was supposed to be just me and my boyfriend. I was also in the middle of switching bedrooms, moving from my old room into my grandpa's room while he was away, since it worked better for my schedule and space. The house felt quiet, but not in a bad way. Just normal, empty house quiet. Earlier in the evening, everything felt fine. We were unpacking my boyfriend's bags, talking, joking, doing normal couple stuff. At one point, I went into the kitchen to throw away an empty Coke can from dinner. That's when the first red flag hit me. When I opened the trash can, I noticed trash that I didn't recognize at all. Sitting right on top of my dinner trash from the previous night were a couple of empty cans from some kind of fish. White albacore or something like that. I remember staring at them, confused, because I would never eat that. Ever. I don't buy it, I don't cook it, and I definitely didn't throw it away. My first thought was my boyfriend. I turned to him and asked if he had thrown anything away when he brought his bags inside earlier. Maybe he had eaten something on the way over, or had trash in his car. He immediately said no. Not hesitantly, not defensively, just a straightforward no. He followed me into the kitchen and I showed him the trash in the can. That's when the fear really started to settle in. The trash wasn't buried at the bottom. It was sitting on top of my trash from the night before. My grandpa had been gone for more than 24 hours at that point. No one else was supposed to be in the house. The idea that someone had been inside the house while I was gone without my knowledge made my stomach drop. I remember feeling my chest tighten and my thoughts start racing. I started running through possibilities in my head. Did I forget something? Did someone come in earlier and I didn't notice? None of it made sense. My boyfriend took me seriously, which I appreciated more than anything in that moment. He didn't laugh or dismiss it, but he did try to keep me calm. He told me to breathe, that we should check the house before assuming the worst. So we decided to do a sweep. We checked the rooms, the bathrooms, the garage. Everything looked normal at first. No obvious signs of someone hiding, no doors or windows wide open. Still, that feeling wouldn't leave me. The house didn't feel right anymore. It felt violated, like my private space wasn't actually mine. Then it happened. While we were in the middle of checking things, I heard a rattling sound coming from the front room. It wasn't subtle. It was loud enough that there was no question something was happening. My heart instantly jumped into my throat. We both froze, listening. The sound came again, metal on metal, or like someone was trying to get into the house. I slowly peeked toward the front of the house and saw that the front porch light was on. Through the door, I could make out a figure. A man was trying to get in. For a split second, my brain refused to process it. Then recognition hit me, and somehow that made it worse. The man appeared to be my grandpa's old roommate. This guy had lived with my grandpa before I moved in, but he had moved out about a week after I arrived, sometime in mid to late August. As far as I knew, he was gone for good. No one had told me otherwise. There was absolutely no reason, in my mind, for him to be trying to get into the house late at night while my grandpa was out of town. Panic set in fully at that point. My boyfriend and I didn't hesitate. We backed away from the front of the house and went straight to the back bedroom. That's where my grandpa keeps his gun, and it's also where the door to the garage is. In our minds, that room gave us two options: defend ourselves if someone forced their way in, or escape through the garage if we had to. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. Earlier, before the rattling started, I had already texted my aunt, the one my grandpa was visiting, about the mysterious trash. She had replied asking if I was scared, but I hadn't answered yet because everything started happening so fast. While we were hiding in the back room, my phone rang. It was my aunt calling me. Right around the time my phone started ringing, the rattling at the front door stopped. That sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. I didn't know if that meant he had gotten in, given up, or was waiting. I answered the phone and whispered at first, my voice shaking. I told my aunt everything. The trash, the man at the door, how terrified I was. She listened, and then she dropped the bombshell that made everything make sense and also made me furious. She told me that my grandpa's old roommate was supposed to move back in sometime over the weekend. No one had told me, not my grandpa, not my aunt, no one. Hearing that explained where the trash came from. It explained why someone had been in the house earlier that day. It explained why the man at the door looked familiar. Logically, the situation suddenly made sense. Emotionally, I was still shaking. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, followed immediately by anger. I was relieved that there probably wasn't a random intruder stalking my house. But I was absolutely furious that my grandpa hadn't told me someone else would be moving back in, especially while he was out of town and I was alone. What really scares me when I think back on it is what could have happened. If my grandpa's roommate had managed to get into the house that night, I would not have hesitated to use the gun. From my perspective in that moment, a man I believed had moved out weeks ago was trying to force his way into the house late at night while I was inside. I had no idea what his intentions were. I had no warning, no context, no explanation. That thought still makes my stomach twist. There are a few details that make the situation even worse. The front door of the house has 2 layers of security. Near there's the regular front door with a deadbolt and a locking handle. Then there's a metal outer door, also with a deadbolt and a locking handle. My grandpa never got a key made for the metal door when it was installed, so the only time that door is locked is when someone is inside the house. I always lock the regular door, whether I'm home or not. I'm careful about that. The metal door, I lock at night when I'm inside. My grandpa's old roommate still had his key from when he used to live there. That's how he was able to get into the house earlier in the day while I was at school. But when he came back later that night, the metal door was locked, which stopped him. The fact that he was able to get in during the day but suddenly couldn't, at night should have been a clear signal that someone else was now living there. Someone else was home. A normal person would have knocked, called, texted, anything. Instead, he rattled the door. That decision alone is what pushed the situation from confusing to terrifying. Standing outside, trying to force your way in, knowing you no longer live there full-time and that someone else might be inside, is reckless at best and dangerous at worst. After everything settled down and I finally understood what had happened, I didn't feel safe anymore. That house no longer felt like home. The walls felt thinner. Every sound felt louder. My trust in the idea that I knew who had access to my space was completely broken. I keep thinking about how easily this could have gone wrong. A misunderstanding, fear, a weapon in the house, one wrong move. That's what keeps replaying in my head. And I'm now seriously considering moving into an apartment by myself for the remainder of the school year. Not because I hate my grandpa, and not because I want to overreact, but because I don't feel safe living in a place where people can come and go without my knowledge. I need to feel like my space is truly mine, where I know exactly who has access and when. Even though the mystery of the trash was technically solved, the damage was already done. That sense of security I had before is gone, and once that's broken, it's very hard to get back. This wasn't a ghost story or a paranormal experience, but it was real fear. The kind that makes your hands shake, your thoughts spiral, and your instincts kick in hard. The kind that leaves you lying awake later, thinking about all the ways things could have ended differently. And honestly, that's what scares me the most. I had just turned 16, and for the first time in my life, my parents trusted me enough to leave town and let me stay home on my own. To me, that felt huge. It wasn't just about having the house to myself. It felt like proof that I was growing up, that I was responsible, that I could handle things on my own. I remember feeling proud, almost invincible, like nothing truly bad could happen because I was being careful. That confidence didn't last very long. That evening, I decided to take my younger sister and her friend out for a drive. We weren't doing anything reckless. No parties, no drinking, no trouble. We just wanted to explore downtown Cleveland a bit, drive around, see the lights, feel like we were part of the city instead of stuck at home. I was focused on doing everything right. I drove carefully. I watched the speed limit. And I checked my mirrors constantly. I felt like I was proving something, not just to my parents, but to myself. At first, it was fun. We talked, laughed, pointed things out as we passed them. Downtown felt alive, busy but not overwhelming. There were cars everywhere, people crossing streets, buildings glowing under streetlights. Nothing felt off. Nothing felt dangerous. It was just another night, another drive. Eventually, we pulled up to a red light. Traffic was steady, cars lined up in every direction. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, my foot on the brake, waiting for the light to change. I remember looking around, not because I was nervous, but because I was bored. When you're stopped at a light, your eyes wander. You glance at other cars, other drivers, anything to pass the time. That's when I saw it. A couple of cars ahead of us, a man suddenly opened his door and jumped out of his car. At first, my brain didn't immediately register danger. It tried to make sense of what I was seeing in a normal way. Maybe his car stalled. Maybe he dropped something. Maybe he was arguing with someone. None of those thoughts lasted more than a second, because then he started running. Not toward the sidewalk, not toward a store. He ran straight into traffic, toward the other cars stopped at the light, and he didn't stop to talk to anyone. He jumped onto the hood of one car, slamming his body down hard enough that I could see the vehicle shake. Then he jumped off and ran to the next one. People inside the cars started panicking. I could see drivers flinching, throwing their hands up, leaning back in their seats. He moved fast. Not like he didn't care about getting hurt, like pain didn't matter to him at all. There was something wild in the way he moved. It wasn't playful. It wasn't confused. It felt aggressive and unpredictable, like he was looking for a reaction. My stomach dropped. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter without even realizing I was doing it. My sister stopped talking. The car felt suddenly very small, very fragile. Then he jumped onto the hood of the car directly in front of me. The impact made the car jolt, and I watched the driver inside freak out, trapped and helpless. For a second, all I could think was that we were next. There was nothing between us and him except a few feet of space and a thin piece of metal. And then he turned his head. He looked straight at me, or that moment is burned into my memory in a way I can't fully describe. His face was covered by a mask. Not a small mask, not something subtle. It was a full mask, exactly like the one the wrestler Mankind used to wear. Pale, distorted, human but wrong. The eyes were dark and empty. The mouth was stretched into a shape that didn't feel like an expression so much as a permanent feature. It didn't look like a joke. It didn't look like a prank. It looked terrifying. When our eyes met, everything slowed down. The noise of the city faded into the background. I wasn't thinking clearly, but I was thinking fast. I remember a single, sharp thought cutting through everything else. He's coming for us. I was 16 years old. My younger sister was sitting beside me. Her friend was in the back seat. Suddenly, the weight of that responsibility hit me all at once. This wasn't just about me anymore. If something happened, it wouldn't just be my fault. I felt exposed, unprepared, and very, very small. My body moved before my mind fully caught up. I turned the wheel slightly, lining the car up with the curb. I was already planning what I would do if he jumped toward us. I was ready to drive up onto the sidewalk if I had to. I didn't care about damaging the car. I didn't care about tickets or trouble or anything else. All that mattered was getting away from him. Then the light turned green. The sound that followed was overwhelming. Horns blared from every direction, loud and angry, filling the air all at once. It was chaos, but in that chaos, something changed. The man seemed to snap out of whatever state he was in. He jumped down from the hood of the car in front of me, backed away, and looked around like he suddenly realized where he was. Without saying a word, he turned, ran back to his car, jumped inside, and sped off. Just like that, he was gone. I didn't hesitate. I didn't stop to think. I made a U-turn as quickly and safely as I could and drove straight home. My heart was still racing. My hands felt numb, like they didn't quite belong to me anymore. I don't remember most of that drive. I just remember wanting to be somewhere safe, somewhere familiar, somewhere that felt normal again. When we got home, I didn't try to act tough. I didn't pretend I was fine. I went straight to my room and hid under my bed. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds childish, especially for a 16-year-old who had just been trusted to stay home alone. But in that moment, it was the only place that felt even remotely safe. The world outside my room suddenly felt dangerous in a way I had never experienced before. I curled up under there, my heart still pounding, my mind replaying the scene over and over again. I kept seeing his face, the mask, the way he looked at me. The certainty I felt in that moment, that if the light hadn't changed, if the horns hadn't gone off, something truly awful could have happened. That feeling didn't fade when I got home. It sat heavy in my chest, making it hard to breathe. Nothing else happened that night. No police showed up. No news report explained it. There was no closure. That almost made it worse. It was just this violent, random moment that crashed into my life and then vanished, leaving behind nothing but fear and questions. That night changed something in me. Before that, I thought danger was distant. Something that happened in movies or on the news or to people who made bad choices. I believed that being careful was enough. That if you followed the rules, stayed responsible, and did the right things, you'd be safe. After that night, I knew better. I learned how quickly normal life can turn into something terrifying, how fast safety can disappear, how being young doesn't protect you, how responsibility doesn't guarantee anything. Sometimes danger just shows up, uninvited, wearing a mask, and all you can do is react. Even now, years later, when I think back on it, what stays with me isn't just the chaos or the fear, it's the moment our eyes met. In that moment, I understood something I had never understood before. That there are people out there who don't operate by the same rules. That sometimes, the only thing standing between you and something terrible is a traffic light changing at the right time. That realization has never left me. And it's a moment I know I will remember for the rest of my life. I've carried two stories with me for a long time. Neither of them happened to me directly, which somehow makes them more unsettling, not less. They came from people I trusted completely, people who had no reason to exaggerate or invent things for attention. These weren't the kind of people who enjoyed scaring others or telling dramatic stories. They were normal, grounded people who were genuinely disturbed by what they experienced. And that sincerity is what made their words stick with me. The first story took place close to where I grew up. It was an area everyone knew about, even if no one talked about it openly. The land had a reputation. People said it had once belonged to Native Americans, long before the town existed. Some said it had been a burial ground. Others said it was a place used for gatherings or rituals. No one ever seemed to agree on the exact history, and maybe no one truly knew. What everyone did agree on was that the land had significance, that it wasn't just empty ground before houses were built on it. Over time, the area was developed. Townhouses were built close together, packed tightly into neat rows. Families moved in. Children played outside. People went to work, came home, cooked dinner, watched television, and went to sleep. To most residents, it was just another quiet neighborhood. I doubt many of them even knew the history of the land beneath their homes. One of my friends lived there. At first, her life was completely normal. Nothing about her house stood out as strange. It looked like every other townhouse in the area. Clean, well-kept, ordinary. But slowly, over time, little things began to happen. The small things that were easy to dismiss at first. She would misplace objects, things like keys or small personal items, and then find them later in places she was absolutely sure she had already checked. At first, she laughed it off. Everyone loses things sometimes. But it kept happening, and the pattern started to bother her. She would search carefully, retracing her steps, only to find the missing item later somewhere obvious, as if it had been placed there intentionally. Then there were the sounds. Early in the mornings, before anyone else was awake, she would hear voices. They weren't loud. She couldn't make out words or sentences, but they were distinct enough that she knew they weren't just random noise or the house settling. It sounded like people speaking softly, somewhere nearby. When she listened harder, the voices would stop, and sometimes she heard footsteps. Slow, steady footsteps moving through the house when everyone else was asleep. She would lie in bed, listening, her heart beating faster as she tried to figure out who could be awake. When she finally got the courage to check, the house would be empty and silent. At that stage, it was still possible to explain everything away. Houses make noise, especially older ones. People mishear things when they're tired. Stress can play tricks on your mind. My friend tried to stay rational. She didn't want to jump to conclusions or scare herself unnecessarily. Then her parents decided to renovate the house. They planned to update parts of it that were outdated. Walls were open, floors were torn up. The structure of the house was disturbed in ways it hadn't been for years. From the moment the renovations began, the strange activity increased. The sounds became more frequent. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. My friend told me it felt like something had been quiet before, almost dormant, and that the renovations had stirred it up. She described a constant sense of unease, like the house itself was aware of what was happening. One morning during the winter, she woke up early and walked over to her window. It was cold outside, and frost had formed on the glass. That alone wasn't unusual. What she saw on the frost, however, stopped her completely. Pressed into the frost was the clear imprint of a face. Not a blurry shape, not something that required imagination to see. It was a distinct side profile of a man's face. She told me she could see the shape of the nose clearly, the outline of the lips, the curve of the brow. Even the level of detail was what made it terrifying. There were fine lines around the eye, almost like veins or wrinkles. It didn't look random. It didn't look accidental. It looked deliberate. It was as if someone had pressed their face against the glass, leaving behind a perfect imprint. Or as if the image had formed on its own, without any physical contact at all. It wasn't smeared or messy. It wasn't something a child could have drawn with their finger. It looked precise, almost careful. She stood there for a long time, frozen, trying to understand what she was seeing. Eventually, she grabbed her phone and took a picture of it. She showed me that picture later. I still remember the feeling I had when I first saw it. My stomach dropped instantly. There was a deep sense of wrongness about it, something that made my skin crawl. It didn't look like pareidolia, the way your brain sometimes turns random patterns into faces. This wasn't vague or abstract. It looked human, intentional, real. There was no explanation for how it got there. Eventually, I lost contact with that friend. Life moved on, as it does. I don't know what happened after that. I don't know if the activity continued or if it eventually stopped. But that image never left my mind. Even now, years later, I can still picture it clearly, and it still fills me with the same cold unease. The second story is shorter, but it's just as disturbing in a different way. It came from a girl I used to talk to. She told me about strange things happening in her house, things that frightened her deeply. She said she would see an apparition of a bald man. Not constantly, but often enough that it became a serious source of fear. Sometimes he would appear suddenly, standing still. Other times he would just watch her. She never described him as doing anything violent, but his presence alone terrified her. Along with these sightings, she experienced episodes that sounded very much like sleep paralysis. She would wake up unable to move, feeling intense pressure on her chest or neck, as if she were being held down or strangled. In those moments, she felt certain that the same figure she saw while awake was responsible. The fear was overwhelming, and she dreaded going to sleep because of it. Other strange things happened too. Faucets in her house would turn on by themselves, suddenly and violently, blasting water at full pressure. It wasn't a slow drip or a minor leak. It was as if someone had twisted the handle as hard as possible. She also described seeing a reflection in her second-story bedroom window, even though there was no physical way for someone to be standing outside at that height. The feeling of being watched followed her constantly, no matter where she was in the house. When she told me all of this, I had an odd feeling. Something about the pattern of events made me think of a question I hadn't planned to ask. It felt like a hunch more than a thought. I asked her if she had ever used a Ouija board. She went quiet for a moment. Then she told me that she had. She and her friends had used one for fun, not taking it seriously, thinking it was just a harmless game. According to her, all of the strange things began after that. Before the Ouija board, nothing unusual had ever happened. After it, everything changed. She didn't say this dramatically. She didn't claim she knew for sure that the board caused what she was experiencing. She simply stated the timeline. Before, normal, after, chaos. I know there are rational explanations for both stories. Frost can form in strange and unexpected patterns. The human brain is excellent at finding faces where none exist. Sleep paralysis can be terrifying, producing vivid hallucinations and sensations that feel completely real. Old houses have plumbing issues. Stress, fear, and suggestion can amplify normal experiences into something much more frightening. I understand all of that. But understanding those explanations doesn't erase the feeling these stories leave behind. What stays with me isn't proof or certainty. It's the consistency, the timing, and the way things seem to escalate after specific events. The details that don't quite line up with coincidence. The fact that these stories were told quietly, almost reluctantly, by people who were genuinely shaken by what they experienced. They weren't trying to convince anyone. They weren't looking for validation or attention. They were just trying to make sense of something that had disturbed them deeply. That's what makes these stories hard to forget. I don't claim to know what really happened in either case. I don't know if it was something supernatural, psychological, environmental, or a combination of all of those things. I don't know if belief played a role, or if fear filled in the gaps. I don't know if there are explanations we simply don't understand yet. All I know is how these stories made me feel, so especially that image in the frost. Some stories stay with you not because they're loud or dramatic, but because they feel real in a way you can't quite explain. They sit quietly in your mind, resurfacing at odd moments, making you question things you usually don't think about. They don't demand belief. They don't insist on answers. They simply exist, unresolved. And these are two stories I've never been able to let go of. When I think back on this now, it feels strange more than truly terrifying, but at the time it absolutely shook me. It's one of those memories that hasn't faded with age. It didn't turn into something blurry or dreamlike. Instead, it stayed sharp, like my mind keeps it in a separate place, untouched by time. This happened in Nepal, where I'm from, in a house that had been built not long before. Everything about the house was new, but new doesn't always mean comforting. Sometimes new just means unfamiliar, and unfamiliar can feel unsettling in ways you don't expect. The house itself had a layout that already felt eerie at night. Each floor had its own rooms, and those rooms were always closed off by doors. Outside those doors were winding stairs that went all the way down to the bottom floor. The stairs weren't straight or open. They curved and twisted slightly, disappearing into shadows as they went down. The lights along the stairwell were placed far apart, so at night there were long stretches where no light reached at all. If you didn't turn the lights on, the stairwell felt deep and hollow, like a vertical tunnel that swallowed sound and movement. Even during the day it felt a little odd, but at night it was much worse. That evening, my younger sister and I were on the top floor in the TV room. It was around 8 at night, not very late, but late enough that the house had gone quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear the walls, where every small sound feels louder because nothing else is happening. We were watching TV, sitting close together, not thinking about anything scary. It was just another normal night. Then my mom called out to us from downstairs. She was on the second floor and told us to come down and eat dinner. Her voice echoed faintly through the stairwell, stretched and distorted by the empty space between floors. There was nothing strange about that. We had heard her call us like that countless times before. It was routine, familiar, safe. Instead of turning on the lights, my sister and I decided to just go downstairs in the dark. I don't know why we did that. Looking back, it seems like such a small and stupid decision. Maybe we were lazy. Maybe we thought it would be quicker. Maybe we were just used to moving around the house without lights on. Kids don't always think about consequences. At the time, it didn't feel risky or scary. It just felt normal. We stepped out of the TV room and into the stairwell. The darkness wrapped around us almost instantly. We could still see a little, just enough to make out the edges of the steps, the faint outline of the railing. We walked down together, side by side, our shoulders almost touching. I could hear our footsteps echoing softly, the sound bouncing in a way that made the space feel bigger than it really was. At first, nothing happened. We reached the second floor. That's when everything changed. Right next to my ear, close enough that I could almost feel someone's breath, a voice spoke. It wasn't loud. It didn't shout. It didn't whisper either. It was calm, clear, and unmistakable. It was a boy's voice. And it said, very simply, "Hello." My entire body reacted before my mind had time to understand what was happening. My heart jumped straight into my throat. For a split second, I froze in place, just like my muscles had locked up. Then my sister and I both screamed at the exact same time. There was no discussion, no hesitation. We turned and ran as fast as we could, bursting through the nearest door into a second-floor room. We slammed the door shut behind us, our hands shaking, our breathing out of control. The silence that followed was just as terrifying. Nothing chased us. There were no footsteps, no laughter, no second voice, no sound at all. Just the sound of our own breathing, loud and uneven, filling the room. My chest hurt from how fast my heart was pounding. My sister looked at me with wide eyes, her face pale. I could tell she was just as scared as I was. For a few seconds, we didn't say anything. We just stood there, frozen, listening, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. After a moment, once I could actually form words again, I asked my sister if she heard it too. I needed to know. I needed confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind, that I hadn't imagined it. My voice was shaking when I asked her. She didn't hesitate. She looked at me and said yes. She heard it. The same voice, the same word. That's the part that still stays with me. It wasn't just me. If it had been just me, I might have convinced myself it was my imagination, a trick of sound, my brain playing games in the dark. But my sister heard it too, at the same time, in the same place. We both reacted instantly, without influencing each other. What made it even stranger was the voice itself. This was Nepal. The voice was clearly English, spoken like a native English-speaking child. Not broken English, not accented English. Just a casual, friendly hello, like something you'd hear on a playground or in a school hallway. At that time, I didn't personally know any white kids in Nepal. We didn't have English-speaking children visiting our house. There was no reason for an English-speaking child to be standing in our stairwell in the dark. Our house was closed. The doors were locked. No one should have been there. We stayed in that room for a while before finally working up the courage to go downstairs with the lights on. Dinner happened like normal. Our mom didn't notice anything wrong at first. We didn't really know how to explain what happened, and maybe we were afraid of not being believed. Kids learn early that strange stories often get brushed off. So we didn't push it. Life went on, but the moment never fully disappeared. It stayed with me, tucked away in my memory, eye resurfacing at odd times. Late at night, when I'm alone in a quiet house, when I walk down a dark stairwell. It doesn't come with fear anymore, not in the same sharp way, but it comes with a deep sense of unease. A question that never got answered. There was another experience, separate from this one, that scared me in a very different way. This one happened at night, in my bedroom. I woke up suddenly and saw a man standing right next to my bed. He was wearing a brown overcoat and a hat. He wasn't blurry or shadowy. He looked solid, real, like an actual person standing there. He was close enough that I could see the shape of him clearly, the outline of his clothes, the way he stood. I tried to move. I couldn't. My body was completely frozen. I couldn't lift my arms. I couldn't turn my head. I couldn't even scream. Panic flooded through me instantly. The kind of fear that hits you all at once without buildup. My chest felt tight. My thoughts scattered. Every part of me was screaming to run, to escape, to do something, but nothing responded. The man didn't speak. He didn't move closer. He just stood there. Then, just like that, it ended. The figure was gone. My body unlocked. I could move again. I sat up in bed, shaking, my heart racing, my room empty and quiet around me. That experience terrified me. But later, when I learned about sleep paralysis, everything about it made sense. The paralysis, the figure, the realism, the intense fear, it fit perfectly. Once I understood it, the fear lost some of its power. Thankfully, that never happened again. The stairwell voice, though, still feels different. That wasn't a dream. I wasn't half asleep. And I wasn't in bed. I was walking, fully awake, with my sister right beside me. We both heard the same thing at the same moment, a voice close and clear, speaking a single word. And it wasn't threatening. That might be the most unsettling part of all. It didn't shout. It didn't growl. It didn't try to scare us. It just said hello. Calm, casual, almost friendly. As if it expected a response. As if it belonged there, in that dark stairwell between floors. In a house that was still too new to feel like home. If it had sounded angry, maybe I could have framed it as danger. If it had sounded distorted or monstrous, maybe fear would have been easier to process. But it didn't. It sounded normal. Human. Familiar. And sometimes those are the moments that stay with you the longest. Not the ones where something clearly wants to hurt you, but the ones where something reaches out in a way that feels almost polite, almost harmless, and leaves you wondering why it was there at all. Even now, years later, I can still hear it in my head. That single word, that calm tone, that impossible closeness. And no matter how much time passes, no matter how many logical explanations I consider, there's always that quiet part of my mind that remembers the way my sister and I screamed at the same time, ran at the same time, and later confirmed the same thing. We both heard it. And whatever it was, it spoke like it didn't see itself as something to fear, which, in a strange way, makes it even harder to forget. When I look back on this now, I understand what it was. I understand the science behind it, the explanations, the terms people use. But understanding it later doesn't erase how real it felt in the moment, or how deeply it changed me. At the time, it wasn't just scary. It rewired the way my body reacts to sleep itself. Even now, years later, I can't sleep on my back or on my stomach without feeling panic rise in my chest. That single night altered something permanent inside me. It started innocently enough. I had been reading about lucid dreaming. I was fascinated by the idea of being aware inside a dream, of controlling it, of stepping into your own mind and shaping what happens. People described flying, changing environments, talking to dream characters, exploring impossible worlds. It sounded incredible. But there was one problem. Every guide I found talked about training your dream recall, keeping journals, practicing for weeks or months. I was impatient. I didn't want to spend all that time building up to it. That's when I found what people called a shortcut. According to what I read, you could force your body into sleep paralysis while keeping your mind awake. From there, you could slip directly into a lucid dream. The instructions were simple on paper but brutal in practice. You lie on your bed, completely still. You do not move. Not your arms, not your legs, not even your face. You don't scratch an itch. You don't swallow deliberately. You don't adjust your position. You just lie there and let your body fall asleep while your mind stays alert. I remember thinking it sounded uncomfortable, but doable. The guide said it would take about 30 minutes. Like 30 minutes of discomfort in exchange for lucid dreaming felt like a fair deal. So I decided to try it. That decision is still one I regret. I lay down on my bed and chose a position I thought would be easiest to stay still in. Almost immediately, my body started fighting me. My nose itched, my arm felt awkward, my leg wanted to move. Every instinct screamed at me to adjust, to scratch, to shift my weight. It felt unnatural, like going against something deeply wired into me. But I forced myself to stay still. Minutes passed slowly, painfully slowly. I remember focusing on my breathing, trying to keep my mind occupied so I wouldn't move. The itch on my nose felt unbearable at times. My body tried every trick it could think of to get me to react. I felt phantom sensations, crawling feelings, pressure in random places. I later learned this is your brain testing whether you're still awake, but at the time it just felt like torture. Eventually, time became hard to track. I wasn't sure how long I had been lying there. It felt like around 30 minutes, maybe more. I started to feel foolish. My body was stiff, my mind tired, and nothing had happened. No dream, no transition, just discomfort. I remember thinking, this isn't working. This is stupid. I'm wasting my time. That thought had barely finished forming when I heard something. a noise. It came from outside my room. At first, it was subtle, a faint sound that immediately made my attention snap toward it. I knew I was alone. That knowledge hit instantly. I didn't panic right away, but my heart rate increased. I listened carefully, trying to figure out what I had heard. My room was quiet, but the silence felt different now, heavier. I tried to call out. I opened my mouth to ask who was there. Nothing came out. That was when the realization hit me like a punch. I couldn't speak. I tried again, harder. Still nothing. My tongue felt heavy. My jaw wouldn't move properly. Panic crept in fast. I tried to move my arms, my legs, anything. I couldn't move. That's when it clicked. I was paralyzed. Before I could fully process that, I heard the sound again. This time it was closer. The unmistakable sound of my door handle being pushed down. Slowly, deliberately, like someone was testing it. My fear spiked instantly. My heart slammed against my chest. My thoughts started racing, but my body was still frozen. The handle moved again, and again. Each time it sounded more aggressive, like whoever was on the other side was trying harder to get in. The handle shook. The door rattled. Then there was banging. Not polite knocking, hard, forceful hits, like someone was slamming their hand or shoulder into the door. I was fully aware, fully conscious, fully trapped inside my own body. At first, I was terrified. Pure, raw fear flooded me. My brain screamed that something was wrong, that someone was trying to break in, that I was helpless. I tried to scream again. Nothing. I tried to move. Nothing. The door kept shaking. Then something strange happened. The fear stopped. It didn't fade slowly. It vanished all at once. In its place, something else took over. Rage. An overwhelming, violent rage exploded inside my head. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't normal anger. It wasn't frustration. It was primal, animalistic. My thoughts stopped making sense in a normal way. One word began repeating in my mind, over and over, louder and louder. Kill, kill, kill. It was horrifying in hindsight, but in that moment it felt absolute. It felt justified. It felt necessary. Every ounce of fear was replaced by a burning need to attack whatever was on the other side of that door. My body felt like it was vibrating with energy, desperate to move, desperate to act. And then, suddenly, I could move. It was like a switch flipped. 1 second I was paralyzed, the next I was free. I didn't think, I didn't hesitate, I didn't plan. I launched myself out of bed and rushed straight toward the door. My mind was blank except for that violent drive. If my roommate had been standing there, I genuinely believe I would have attacked him without hesitation. That's how intense it was. That's how out of control I felt. I threw the door open. There was nothing there. The hallway was empty, silent, normal. No signs of struggle. No damage to the door. No person, no shadow, no sound. Just a quiet house and my own breathing, heavy and ragged. The rage evaporated almost instantly once I realized there was nothing there. In its place came confusion, shock, and exhaustion. My body felt weak. My hands were shaking. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Eventually, I went back to bed. I didn't sleep much that night. The days that followed were strange. I felt disconnected, like my sense of safety had been cracked. I kept replaying the experience in my head. The paralysis, the door handle, the banging, the rage, the way my own thoughts had turned violent without warning. That part scared me more than the hallucination itself. It felt like something inside me had been unlocked that I didn't know existed. Later, when I researched sleep paralysis more deeply, everything lined up. The inability to move or speak, the auditory hallucinations, the sense of a presence, the intense emotional responses. Even the rage made sense in a way, as a fight response to perceived danger. My body thought it was under attack and reacted accordingly. But knowing that didn't undo the damage. From that night on, sleep was never the same. I became afraid of certain positions. Sleeping on my back or my stomach now triggers immediate anxiety. My body remembers. Even if my mind knows I'm safe, my nervous system doesn't care. It reacts as if danger is imminent. My heart races. my muscles tense. I feel that same creeping sense of being trapped. I never tried that shortcut again. I never attempted to force lucid dreaming. The idea of deliberately putting myself back into that state terrifies me. I learned the hard way that some shortcuts exist for a reason, and some doors in the mind are better left closed. What haunts me most isn't the sound of the door or the paralysis itself. It's the rage. The way it replaced fear so completely. The way violent thoughts felt automatic and unstoppable. It forced me to confront something uncomfortable about the human brain, how quickly it can shift, how thin the line is between fear and aggression, how survival instincts don't always come with moral filters. That night taught me respect for sleep, for the mind, and for the fragile balance that keeps us grounded. It taught me that curiosity without caution can lead you somewhere you're not prepared to go. And it taught me that even when an experience has an explanation, that doesn't mean it won't leave scars. I still think about that night sometimes, especially when I lie awake unable to sleep, afraid to move, afraid not to move. It's strange how something that lasted only minutes can echo through years. I wanted lucid dreams. What I got was a lesson I'll never forget. This isn't the scariest thing that ever happened to me, and there was no moment where I felt like I was in danger, but it's one of those experiences that has stayed with me far longer than I expected. I was very young when it happened, around 7 or 8 years old, and maybe that's part of why it stuck so deeply. When something strange happens to you as a child, before you've learned how to neatly explain the world, it settles somewhere quiet in your mind and never really leaves. Every summer, my mom and I would travel to Rhode Island to visit my grandpa and my step-grandma. It was a tradition, something I looked forward to all year. The trip itself felt special, like stepping into a different version of life. Everything moved slower there. The air smelled different, especially in the evenings. There was something calm and familiar about being in their house, even though it wasn't the place where I lived day to day. Their house had that comfortable, lived-in feeling that older homes often have. It wasn't fancy or modern. It was warm, full of little details that showed years of routine and memory. The furniture was sturdy and slightly worn, the kind that didn't feel fragile. There were family photos on the walls, old lamps that cast a soft yellow light, and the quiet hum of a house that had been standing for a long time. I always felt safe there. My grandpa was gentle and quiet, the kind of person who didn't need to talk much to be comforting. My step-grandma was warm and practical, always busy with something, cooking or cleaning or organizing, but never in a way that felt stressful. Being there felt like being wrapped in something familiar, even though it wasn't my everyday home. That day had been completely normal. There was nothing unusual about it at all. It wasn't late at night, it wasn't stormy. No one was upset or emotional. There was no tension in the house. It was just another summer day, moving toward evening. I don't remember exactly what we'd done earlier. Probably something ordinary like sitting outside, watching TV, or just talking. What I do remember clearly is the moment that changed everything. My mom and I were in the dining area, setting the table for dinner. It was one of those simple tasks you don't really think about. Plates, forks, glasses, maybe napkins. I remember standing there, focused on what I was doing, not thinking about anything strange or scary. My mind was probably on food or whatever kids think about at that age. Then we heard it. A voice. It wasn't loud. It didn't shout. It didn't sound angry or threatening. It was clear, calm, and unmistakable. It said 2 names. Andrew, Lori. My name. And my mom's name. The moment it happened, time felt like it paused for half a second. My mom and I both froze at exactly the same time. We looked at each other instantly, eyes wide, the way people do when they both know they just heard the same thing. There was no confusion in that first moment. We both knew the voice had spoken our names. We both said, "What?" at the same time. Not because we were scared, but because our brains automatically assumed someone had spoken to us. That's the natural response. When you hear your name, you answer. It didn't even occur to me at first, that anything was wrong. Then the confusion set in. We looked around the room. There was no one else there. The voice hadn't come from the TV. The TV wasn't even on. There was no radio playing, no phone ringing, No one standing behind us. My mom immediately turned toward my step-grandma and my grandpa, who were in another part of the house, and asked if either of them had called us. They both looked genuinely confused. They said no. They hadn't said anything. They hadn't heard anything either. That was the moment where the feeling shifted. Up until then, it was just strange. After that, it became unsettling. I remember my stomach tightening in that quiet, instinctive way you feel before your mind fully understands what's happening. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't crying. I was just uneasy. My mom looked unsettled too, though she tried not to show it. She asked again, just to be sure if they were absolutely certain they hadn't called our names. They were sure. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. The normal sounds of a house were still there, but suddenly they felt louder in contrast. The soft clink of dishes, the faint hum of electricity, the distant sound of something outside. Everything felt sharper because we were all listening now, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't. Dinner went on as normal. Everyone sat down, talked, ate. No one mentioned it much after that, at least not in front of me. My mom stayed calm, but I could tell she was thinking about it. I was thinking about it too, even though I didn't fully understand why it bothered me so much. The voice had sounded familiar. That's the part that still gets to me. It didn't sound like a stranger. It didn't sound distorted or unnatural. It didn't echo or whisper. It sounded like someone who knew us. Someone who was comfortable saying our names. Someone who expected us to hear them. As a kid, I didn't have the language to describe that feeling, but I felt it all the same. The voice wasn't scary in the way horror stories are scary. It didn't feel evil or threatening. It felt personal, direct, like it belonged there. That night, I didn't sleep badly. I wasn't afraid to close my eyes. I didn't imagine things in the dark, but the memory kept replaying in my head. The exact tone of the voice, the way it said our names, the way my mom and I reacted at the same time. Years later, that memory still feels vivid. As I got older, I learned more about my family history, including something that added another layer to the experience. My biological grandmother, my mom's mother, had died a month after I was born. I never met her. I don't remember her. But I grew up hearing about her, seeing her in photos, knowing how much she meant to my mom. She was always described as loving, gentle, and deeply attached to family. The kind of person who would absolutely call your name from another room. The kind of presence that would feel familiar and comforting rather than frightening. When I learned that, the experience took on a different meaning for me. I don't claim to know what happened that day. I don't say with certainty that it was my grandmother. I also don't think it was necessarily something supernatural in a dramatic sense. There are rational explanations people can offer. Auditory hallucinations. Sound carrying strangely through an old house. Two people influencing each other's perception in the same moment. I've heard all of those explanations, but none of them fully satisfy me. What makes this moment different from other strange memories is that my mom heard it too. It wasn't just me, a child with an active imagination. It wasn't just one person mishearing something. Two people heard the same voice say the same words at the same time. And no one else in the house had spoken. That shared experience matters. Over time, the fear faded, but the curiosity didn't. I don't think about it every day. It doesn't haunt me. But when it comes back to mind, it still makes me pause. It still gives me that quiet, thoughtful feeling, like standing in a place where something important happened but left no physical trace. I like to think it was my grandmother. Not because I need it to be something paranormal, but because that interpretation feels gentle rather than frightening. The idea that someone who never got the chance to know me might still have known my name. That someone who meant everything to my mom might still have been close enough, at least once, to say her name out loud. There's something comforting in that thought. The voice didn't ask for anything. It didn't linger. It didn't repeat itself. It didn't cause fear or chaos. It simply spoke our names and then was gone. If it was something unexplained, it wasn't trying to scare us. It wasn't trying to make a statement. It was just there. And then it wasn't. As an adult, I understand why stories like this make people uncomfortable. They don't fit neatly into logic. They're not dramatic enough to be clearly fictional, but not explainable enough to be dismissed entirely. They sit in that uncomfortable middle space where certainty doesn't exist. But that's okay. Not everything needs a clean explanation to matter. That moment in Rhode Island didn't change my life in a dramatic way. It didn't make me afraid of houses or voices or being alone. But it did leave me with a quiet awareness that there are things we don't fully understand, and that sometimes those things aren't terrifying. Sometimes they're just strange, personal, and fleeting. Even now, when I think back to that summer, I don't remember fear. I remember surprise, confusion, and a strange sense of closeness, like the house itself had briefly acknowledged us. A voice said our names. We heard it. And even all these years later, that simple fact is enough to make me stop and wonder.
Pardon the interruption for just a moment. I hope these stories are keeping you on the edge of your seat tonight. If you're finding yourself drawn to these dark accounts, I'd love to have you join us. If you're new here, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We share new, true horror stories every single day, and being part of the community is the only way to make sure you never miss a nightmare. A quick like and a comment also means a lot. It really helps the shadows spread a little further. But for now, let's get back to it. The darkness is calling.
I know I'm very late to sharing this, but it's something that stayed with me for years. And even now, thinking about it still gives me a strange, uncomfortable feeling. It's one of those childhood experiences that never really leaves you. You grow older, you learn new explanations, you tell yourself it was imagination or fear or something else, but the memory itself never fully loses its weight. From the time I was about 4 years old until I was maybe 7, I had nightmares every single night about the same thing. The same figure, the same presence. I didn't give him that name at the time, but later, when I tried to explain it to people, I started calling him the Green Man. The Green Man was always the same. He was tall. Too tall. He wore a long black cape that seemed to flow behind him no matter where he was standing. Or his skin was dark green, not bright or cartoonish, but deep and sickly, like something rotten or unnatural. His eyes were red slits, narrow and sharp, and they didn't blink. He had no nose at all, just a flat space where one should have been. His mouth was wide, filled with sharp, razor-like teeth that looked too big for his face. I can still picture him clearly, even now. Every night, he would appear in my dreams. Sometimes he chased me. Sometimes he just stood there and watched me. Sometimes he spoke, and sometimes he didn't need to. I always knew he was there before I even saw him. The fear came first. A heavy, crushing fear that felt bigger than me, bigger than the room, bigger than the dream itself. These weren't normal childhood nightmares. They didn't fade when I woke up. They didn't blur or lose detail over time. They followed me into the day. I would wake up shaking, drenched in sweat, my heart racing so hard it hurt. I was terrified to go back to sleep because I knew he'd be waiting for me again. My parents knew something was wrong. I would cry at night. I would beg to sleep with the lights on. I would beg not to be left alone. I tried to explain what I was seeing, but when you're that young, words don't come easily. All you can do is describe the fear, and fear doesn't always make sense to adults. Then one night, something happened that changed how my parents looked at it. I had a nightmare where the Green Man attacked my infant brother. In the dream, he wasn't chasing me this time. He went straight for my baby brother. I remember screaming. I remember trying to stop him and being unable to move. Like my body was frozen while everything horrible played out in front of me. When I woke up, I was hysterical. I ran to my mom and told her what I had seen, sobbing, barely able to breathe. She tried to calm me down, told me it was just a bad dream, told me my brother was fine. And at the time, that should have been the end of it. But a few hours later, something happened that no one ever explained. My mom went to change my brother's diaper. While she was doing that, she found something inside the diaper. It wasn't supposed to be there. It hadn't been there before. It was one of those sticky green hands, the cheap little toys you get from quarter machines. The ones made of rubbery plastic that you can throw at walls and windows and they stick for a second before sliding down. Bright green. Exactly the same shade I always associated with the Green Man. No one knew how it got there. My brother was an infant. He couldn't walk. He couldn't grab toys and put them places. My parents didn't keep toys like that near him. No one admitted to putting it there. No one could explain it. And the strangest part was how it was handled afterward. No one talked about it again. Not really. There was no big discussion, no investigation, no long explanations. My parents seemed shaken, but they also seemed to want to forget it ever happened. Looking back now, I think they were scared. Not of the toy itself, but of what it meant. Of how closely it matched something their child had been describing for years. Eventually, they decided the house was the problem. It was an old house, the kind with creaky floors, strange drafts, or in rooms that always felt darker than they should. They said it was probably haunted, or at least bad for a child with an active imagination. Whether they truly believed that or just needed a reason to leave, I don't know. But we moved. For a while, things were better. Fast forward a few years. We moved into a brand new house, freshly built, no history, no previous owners, everything clean and bright and modern, the kind of place that should feel safe by default. I remember my parents being relieved. They thought whatever had been affecting me was tied to the old house, and now it was finally over. It wasn't. Only a few weeks after moving in, the dream started again. Same Green Man. Same fear. Same certainty that he was coming for me. At first, it was only in my dreams, just like before. But then something changed, and the line between dreaming and waking started to blur. I began to notice things at night when I was fully awake. Sounds, feelings, sensations that didn't belong. I could hear him. Not clearly at first. Just vague noises. A presence. Something that felt like it was moving nearby. I always knew when he was coming. It wasn't something I had to think about. My body reacted before my mind did. I would suddenly feel cold, even if the room was warm. Not just chilly, but deeply cold, like the warmth was being pulled out of me from the inside. Then came the terror. Not fear you can explain or reason with. Utter terror. The kind that freezes you in place and makes your chest feel tight. One night stands out more than the others. I had a fever. I remember that clearly. I was sick, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. The room felt strange, like it does when you're ill and half aware of your surroundings. Shadows seemed deeper. Sounds felt louder. My thoughts were slow and heavy. Then it happened. The cold hit me all at once. That same feeling of terror flooded my body. My heart started racing. I knew he was there. I didn't need to see him to know it. Then I heard his voice. He yelled one word. Look. It wasn't angry. It wasn't excited. It was loud and monotone, flat and commanding. Like a statement, not a suggestion. I looked. On my dresser were 2 dolls, toys I'd had for a long time. They were standing upright, exactly where I'd left them earlier. As I watched, they started moving. They began attacking each other. Their arms swung. They fell into each other. It looked violent, chaotic, wrong. I remember staring at them, unable to scream, unable to move. My mind trying desperately to understand what I was seeing. To this day, I don't know if that part was real. It could have been a hallucination caused by the fever. I know that now. I know that sickness can make the brain do strange things. But at the time, that explanation didn't exist for me. All I knew was what I saw and how real it felt. The fear was real. The moment was real. The memory is real. After that night, things slowly faded. The dreams became less frequent. The sounds stopped. The cold, crushing terror stopped coming. The Green Man stopped appearing. One day, without warning, he was just gone. He never came back. I grew older. I moved on. Life filled in the space where that fear used to live. School, friends, responsibilities, normal problems. The kind of things that push childhood memories into the background. But sometimes, I still think about him. I think about how real it all felt. I think about the sticky green hand in my brother's diaper and how no one ever explained it. I think about the way my body reacted before my mind did, like it knew something my brain couldn't process yet. I think about how it followed me from an old house into a brand new one, like location didn't matter at all. I don't know what the green man was. I don't know if it was just nightmares fueled by a child's imagination. I don't know if it was anxiety, stress, illness, or something else entirely. I don't claim it was supernatural. I don't claim it wasn't. All I know is that it felt real. It felt real enough to shape my childhood. Real enough to scare my parents. Real enough that, even now, years later, writing this makes my skin prickle and my stomach tighten just a little. Maybe it was just a phase. Maybe my mind created something it needed to work through fear or change. Maybe it was nothing more than a child's brain trying to make sense of the world. Or maybe it was something else. Either way, I'm grateful it stopped. I'm grateful it never came back. And I'm grateful that now, when I wake up in the middle of the night, the darkness is just darkness and the silence is just silence. But I'll never forget the green man. And I don't think I was ever supposed to. This didn't happen to me directly. It happened to my wife, back before we ever met. And even now, she barely talks about it. I only heard the full story once, and that was after I laughed at a haunting show on TV and made some offhand comment about people imagining things. She went quiet for a long time after that, and then, very calmly, she told me what she had lived through. I never joked about that kind of thing again. At the time, my wife was living with an old roommate in a small house. It wasn't some ancient mansion or creepy abandoned place. It was just a normal house in a normal neighborhood. That's part of why none of it made sense at first. They had both just moved in, excited about having their own place, setting things up, getting into routines. The house felt fine during the day, bright, ordinary, a nothing that screamed, "Something is wrong here." The strange things started slowly, almost small enough to ignore. The first thing they noticed was the lights. Every night, almost exactly at 9 p.m., lights would flicker. Not just one lamp or one room. Multiple lights. Sometimes they'd dim for a second, sometimes they'd flicker on and off. At first, they assumed it was bad wiring. Old houses have quirks. Power surges happen. They joked about it and moved on. But it kept happening, not randomly, always around the same time. Then there were the noises. Around 3 a.m., almost every night, there would be banging sounds somewhere in the house. Not soft creaks or settling noises. Actual bangs. Sometimes from the walls, sometimes from doors. Sometimes it sounded like something hitting the house from the outside. And then there was the doorknob. Around that same time, 3 a.m., they would hear a doorknob jiggling, turning back and forth. Slowly. Deliberately. Like someone was standing on the other side of the door, testing it, trying to open it without making too much noise. At first, my wife and her roommate tried to explain it away. Maybe it was an animal outside. Maybe it was the house settling. Maybe it was their imagination. They didn't want to talk about it to anyone else. They were afraid people would laugh at them, or tell them they were being dramatic, or accuse them of feeding off each other's fear. So they kept it to themselves. They locked their doors at night. They slept with lights on. They tried to ignore it, but ignoring it didn't stop it. The pattern never changed. Lights flickering around 9 p.m., noises and doorknob movement around 3 a.m., night after night. Because of it, neither of them slept well. Even when nothing happened, they were tense, waiting for it. Listening. Watching the clock. Dreading the hours when they knew something would start. They became exhausted. Not just tired, but drained. Jumping at every sound. Lying awake long after the house went quiet again. Eventually, it started affecting their jobs. They were late. They were sluggish. They made mistakes. They couldn't focus. Both of them got warnings at work for being tired all the time. That's when they realized this wasn't something they could just ignore anymore. Desperate for answers, they started looking into the house. They checked the wiring. Nothing wrong. They checked the doors and locks. Nothing loose. They checked for animals in the walls or attic. Nothing. Finally, They did something they hadn't wanted to do at first. They looked into the history of the house. That's when they found out that the previous renter had committed suicide there, not long before they moved in. Learning that didn't make them feel better. It made everything worse. Suddenly, every noise felt heavier. Every flicker of light felt intentional. Still, they tried to stay rational. A tragic event doesn't automatically mean a house is haunted. They knew that. They kept telling themselves that. They even tried doing a kind of informal paranormal investigation. Nothing dramatic, no seances or rituals, just documenting times, sounds, patterns. They noticed how consistent everything was. How exact. Almost like the house was on a schedule. But there was still no physical explanation. Eventually, my wife's parents came to visit. While her parents didn't believe in any of it, especially her father. He teased her all day about being scared of noises and shadows. He joked about ghosts and told her she was letting her imagination run wild. My wife didn't argue. She didn't try to convince him. She just stayed quiet. That night, her parents stayed in her bedroom upstairs, and my wife slept on the couch downstairs. She was already on edge. Around 3 a.m., right on time, she heard something at the window near the couch. A scratching sound. Slow, repetitive, like fingernails dragging lightly across glass. She pulled the blanket over her head and froze. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. She was too scared to even sit up. Upstairs, at the same time, my mother-in-law woke up. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow footsteps, coming toward the bedroom door. She sat up in bed, I'm fully awake now, and watched the doorknob turn. Not violently, just turning, back and forth, like someone trying to open it carefully. She waited for someone to knock or speak. Nothing. She called out my wife's name, thinking maybe she was checking on them. There was no answer. Downstairs, my wife heard her mother call out and nearly panicked. She wanted to respond, but fear held her still. She stayed under the blanket, shaking, convinced that if she made a sound, whatever was there would know exactly where she was. After a while, the sound stopped. In the morning, her parents asked why she hadn't answered them during the night. When they compared what they'd experienced, the teasing stopped. My father-in-law didn't joke anymore. He didn't laugh. He didn't have an explanation. Not long after that visit, my wife moved out. She doesn't talk about that house. Not with friends, not with family, not even with me, except that one time. The fear runs too deep. Whatever it was, it affected her in a way that never really went away. She still hates doorknobs clicking at night. She still wakes up around 3 a.m. sometimes, heart racing. And if the lights flicker, even just once, she gets quiet. I don't know what happened in that house. I don't pretend to have an answer. But I know this much. Multiple people experience the same things, at the same times, in the same ways. And even the biggest skeptic in the room had his laughter taken away in a single night. Some stories don't need proof. You can hear it in the way people refuse to tell them again. It happened a little after midnight, around 12:05. The restaurant had officially closed at 12, and we were in that familiar after-hours rhythm. Chairs flipped up, floors being swept, counters wiped down. The place felt quieter than usual, that hollow, late-night quiet that settles in once customers are gone and the lights are a little dimmer. Everyone was tired, just going through the motions, ready to finish up and go home. That's when we saw the headlights. At first, it didn't raise any alarms. Cars pulled into the lot after closing all the time. People either didn't read the hours or thought they could still sneak in. Usually, they'd walk up, see the locked doors and the closed sign, maybe tug on the handle once, then shrug and leave. It was annoying, but it was routine. No one panicked over headlights in the parking lot. But this car was different. It was a big black Cadillac Escalade, spotless with dark-tinted windows. The kind of vehicle that immediately draws your eye without you meaning to stare. It rolled into the lot slowly and stopped right in front of the building. I remember feeling a small flicker of unease, though I didn't know why yet. Something about how deliberate it looked, how it didn't just pull in and idle like most cars did. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. And the first thought that popped into my head was how much he looked like Biggie Smalls. I'm not exaggerating. Big, tall, heavy-set black guy, wearing a full 90s style sweatsuit. It was such a strong resemblance that it almost felt unreal, like my brain was trying to fill in details too quickly. I shook that thought off immediately. I'm not one to stereotype or jump to conclusions just because someone looks intimidating. I figured this would go like it always did. I raised my hand and gestured toward the closed sign on the door, trying to be polite but clear. Just a simple motion. The universal, "Sorry, we're closed" signal. I even gave a small apologetic wave, the kind meant to say, "Nothing personal, just business." That's when his expression changed. Instantly. His face twisted with anger, and he started stomping his feet like a child throwing a tantrum. He clenched his fists, pacing a step or two in front of the door. Then, out of nowhere, he punched his own car. Hard. The sound echoed in the quiet parking lot, metal on flesh. I remember thinking, what an idiot, that's an expensive car. But before I could even fully process that, the passenger door opened. Another guy got out, smaller than the first, clearly trying to calm him down. He stepped between the big guy and the door, hands up in that relax, relax posture. I could see him talking, probably telling him it wasn't worth it, that the place was closed, that they should just leave. What happened next made my stomach drop. The big guy turned on his friend and punched him straight in the face. No hesitation, no warning. The punch was brutal. The smaller guy crumpled immediately and hit the ground, completely out cold. I remember standing there frozen, my brain refusing to catch up to what my eyes had just seen. This wasn't just some angry customer anymore. This was real violence, happening right in front of us. Before anyone inside could react, the big guy turned back toward the restaurant, and he charged the door. He threw his full weight against it, slamming himself into the glass again and again, trying to force it open. The doors rattled violently. The sound was terrifying, a deep, heavy thud that made the whole front of the building shake. My heart started racing so fast it felt like it was in my throat. That's when panic finally hit me. I started yelling for my manager, my voice coming out louder and more frantic than I expected. I didn't care if I sounded scared. I was scared. Everyone in the restaurant was suddenly alert, frozen in place, staring toward the front. My manager came running out of his office. The second he saw what was happening, his face went pale. He didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and called 911 immediately, his voice shaking just enough to give away how serious the situation was. The big guy noticed. He stopped ramming the door and slowly turned his head toward the window. Our eyes met through the glass, and that moment is burned into my memory. There was no confusion on his face, no surprise, just rage and defiance. He raised his middle finger, holding it there deliberately, staring straight at us. Then he turned around. As if nothing had happened, he walked back to the parking lot. He picked up his unconscious friend like it was no big deal, dragged him to the Escalade, and shoved him into the back seat. He got into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and turned the engine back on. Before pulling away, he leaned out the window just enough to flip us off one last time. Then he drove off into the night. The parking lot was silent again, but it didn't feel calm. It felt empty in a dangerous way, or like the air itself was holding onto the tension he left behind. None of us spoke for a few seconds. We just stood there, listening to our own breathing, trying to process what had just happened. The police arrived not long after, but by then, the car was gone. We gave statements, described the vehicle, the men, everything we could remember. But deep down, I knew it was unlikely anything would come of it. He had vanished as suddenly as he appeared. After the cops left and the doors were locked again, the restaurant felt different. The familiar comfort of the space was gone. Every shadow seemed sharper. Every sound felt louder. We finished cleaning in near silence, all of us eager to leave. Even now, thinking back on it, what sticks with me isn't just how close we came to something much worse. It's how quickly things escalated. One minute it was a normal closing shift, the next it was violence, fear, and the realization that locked doors and routines don't always protect you the way you think they do. It wasn't a ghost story. It wasn't something unexplained. It was real, raw, human danger. And sometimes that's far more unsettling than anything supernatural. When my parents were younger, long before I was old enough to remember much of anything clearly, they went through something that my mom still talks about in a quiet, uneasy way. I was around 3 years old at the time, still a toddler, and we had just moved into a brand new house in a brand new subdivision. On paper, it sounded perfect. A fresh start, a new home, a growing family. In reality, it felt strange and unfinished, like living in the middle of something that wasn't quite real yet. Most of the houses around ours hadn't been built. There were empty lots stretching out in every direction, patches of dirt and half-poured foundations, stacks of wood and construction materials sitting where homes would eventually stand. At night, the neighborhood felt especially empty. No streetlights in some places, very few neighbors. Long stretches of silence broken only by wind or the occasional distant sound of a car. During the day, it looked like progress. At night, it looked like isolation. Our house itself was small but new. Everything still smelled faintly of fresh paint and new wood. The layout was simple. The kitchen faced the front of the house, and from there you could see the front door, which was slightly recessed into the structure. It wasn't flush with the outside wall, but set back a bit, creating a small, sheltered space. That detail didn't matter much during the day, but at night, it made the doorway feel like a dark pocket in the house. One night, sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning, that silence shattered. There was a loud knock at the front door. Not a polite knock, not a quick tap. It was forceful, sharp, loud enough to jolt both my parents awake instantly. The kind of sound that doesn't belong in the middle of the night, especially in a neighborhood where almost no one lived yet. My mom sat up in bed, heart pounding, already tense. I was asleep in my room, unaware of any of it. My dad got up and went downstairs. He didn't open the door. Instead, he went to the kitchen window, which looked out toward the front door area. He slid it open just enough to speak through and called out, asking what was going on. There was a man standing outside the front door. My dad couldn't see him clearly in the dark, but he could hear him. The man yelled up, saying he needed help. He said he was hurt. He said he needed to be let inside so he could call an ambulance. His voice sounded strained, urgent, desperate. In another situation, maybe during the day, maybe in a busy neighborhood, things might have gone differently. But my dad was a young father with a wife and a small child asleep upstairs. He was standing in a half-empty subdivision in the middle of the night, with no neighbors close by, staring out at a stranger he couldn't properly see. Something about it didn't feel right. So my dad did what he thought was the safest thing. He told the man to wait where he was and that he would call an ambulance for him. He said help was coming, that the man didn't need to come inside. That's when the tone changed. The man started yelling back, but now his voice was angry. Not panicked, not weak, angry. He shouted that no, my dad had to let him in, that he was hurt, that he was dying, that he needed to be inside the house. The desperation suddenly felt aggressive, almost demanding. My dad repeated himself. He said no. He said to stay there. He said he was calling an ambulance right now. As my dad turned away from the window to go get the phone, the man took off. Just ran. No sound of stumbling. No sound of someone injured. Just the sound of footsteps moving quickly away from the house and then nothing. The suddenness of it was unsettling. If the man was truly hurt, truly dying, why would he run? Why would he leave the one place where help was being offered? My dad locked everything, double-checked the doors, and called the police anyway. My mom stayed upstairs with me, shaken but trying to stay calm. The house felt very small in that moment, surrounded by so much empty space. They thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Later that same night, there was banging on the back door. That part still makes my mom's voice tighten when she talks about it. The back door didn't face the street. It faced the backyard, which my parents had gone to great effort to secure. They had built a huge custom fence to keep animals out, especially because the area was still so undeveloped. The fence was around 15 feet high, made of sheer-faced wooden planks. No footholds, no gaps. It was designed to be extremely difficult to climb. On top of that, the gates had heavy deadbolt locks. Someone shouldn't have been able to get back there easily. And yet, there was loud banging on the back door. Not a gentle knock. Not someone testing the handle. Hard bangs, forceful enough to echo through the house. My dad went to the back window and yelled out that he had already called the cops. He shouted it clearly, hoping whoever was there would hear and leave. The banging stopped. Just like that. No footsteps, no reply, just silence again. That silence lasted the rest of the night. The police eventually came by and checked the area, but by then, there was no one there. No sign of anyone trying to get in. No damage to the doors. No explanation for how someone could have even gotten into the backyard. My parents barely slept until morning. When daylight came, things should have felt safer. The sun was up. The empty lots didn't look as threatening. The night's events could almost be brushed off as something strange but over. My dad got ready for work, still tired, still uneasy, but ready to leave the house and get back to routine. When he opened the front door, he stopped. Sitting on the porch was a bottle. It was a wine bottle, placed upright, as if someone had carefully set it there. Taped to it was a piece of paper with a handwritten label. On it were the words, "Wine, thanks for the help." The handwriting alone was enough to send a chill through them. My mom swears to this day that it looked like it had been written in blood. Dark, uneven, smeared in a way that didn't look like normal ink. Whether it actually was blood or just something that looked disturbingly similar, neither of them wanted to find out. They never touched the bottle. They didn't open it. They didn't smell it. They didn't keep it. My dad threw it out immediately. Straight into the trash, no hesitation. After that, nothing else happened. No more knocking, no more banging, no strange figures in the night. Life went on. The subdivision slowly filled in. Houses were built. Neighbors moved in. And the area became normal, even quiet in a comfortable way. But that night stayed with them. Looking back as an adult, what makes the story so unsettling isn't just the events themselves, it's the pattern. The way the man demanded to be let inside instead of accepting help. The way he disappeared the moment my dad insisted on calling an ambulance. The way he somehow ended up at the back door later, despite the fence. And finally, the bottle, the note, the message left behind. It feels deliberate. It feels like something meant to unsettle, meant to leave a mark, meant to say, "I was here." My mom has said many times that she believes my dad did exactly the right thing. If he had opened that door, things could have gone very differently. The anger in the man's voice still sticks with her. The way it switched so fast from pleading to rage. Mom, that wasn't the voice of someone helpless. That was the voice of someone frustrated they weren't getting what they wanted. They've never been able to explain the bottle. That's the part that doesn't fit neatly into any explanation. If it was someone trying to break in, why leave a gift? If it was a prank, why go to such lengths, and why choose such a disturbing message? If it was someone mentally unstable, how did they get into the backyard and then leave without a trace? There are no clear answers. And maybe that's why the story still creeps people out when they hear it. Nothing outright terrible happened. No one was hurt. No crime was committed that anyone could prove. And yet, it feels like a near miss. Like something brushed up against their lives and then slipped away. My parents don't like talking about it too much. My dad usually shrugs it off, saying it was probably just someone trying to scam their way inside. My mom, though, still gets quiet when the subject comes up. She always mentions the note, the handwriting, the feeling that someone had stood on their porch in the early morning light, placing that bottle there carefully, knowing they would find it. I don't remember any of this myself. I was too young. But growing up with the story, hearing it retold over the years, it became one of those family memories that sits in the background, never fully explained, never fully forgotten. It's not a ghost story, it's not a monster story. It's a story about a door not being opened at the wrong time. And sometimes that's scarier than anything supernatural. It's strange how much trust children place in the world around them, and how natural that trust feels when you're living inside it. When you're young, you don't carry the constant sense of danger that adults do. You don't scan crowds for threats. You don't question people's intentions. You assume the world works the way it's supposed to. You assume adults will protect you. You assume that if something goes wrong, someone will fix it. As a child, that way of thinking feels normal. It feels right. It's only when you grow older and look back that you realize how fragile that trust really was. I learned that the hard way when I was a kid, around the same age as a lot of those stories you hear now about children going missing for a few terrifying hours or sometimes forever. At the time, it didn't feel like a near miss, or it felt like a small adventure that ended well. As an adult, it feels like something else entirely. It happened at the seaside. I was there with my granddad and my brother. It was meant to be a simple family day out, nothing special. Just the kind of trip families take when the weather is decent and everyone wants a change of scenery. The seaside was busy, full of people enjoying the day. There were families pushing strollers, kids running around with buckets and spades, people carrying towels, bags, and food. The air smelled like salt and sunscreen and fried food from nearby stalls. You could hear waves crashing, seagulls crying, and voices overlapping into a constant background noise. To me, as a kid, it felt exciting and safe at the same time. I remember being happy, not because of anything deep or meaningful, but because I had an ice cream in my hand. At that age, that was everything. The world narrowed down to that one thing. The cold sweetness, the way it slowly melted in the sun, the way I had to lick it quickly to stop it dripping down my fingers. I was completely focused on it. So focused that I didn't notice what was happening around me. While I was busy trying to manage my ice cream, my granddad and my brother kept walking. Maybe they thought I was right behind them. Maybe they assumed I was keeping up. It wasn't anyone's fault. There wasn't a moment where someone let go of my hand and everything suddenly went wrong. It was quieter than that. Slower. A few steps here, a pause there, a shift in the crowd. And suddenly, when I looked up, they weren't there anymore. At first, I wasn't scared. That's one of the details that really sticks with me now. I didn't feel panic right away. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt confused. I stood still, holding my ice cream, turning my head slowly, scanning faces, fully expecting to see my granddad any second. In my mind, this was a temporary mistake. He would turn around. He would realize I wasn't there. He would come back. That's how the world worked. When that didn't happen right away, I started to move. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I walked, carefully, like I was trying to solve a puzzle. I remember thinking about what I should do, using the logic I had at that age. I asked myself where he might look for me if he realized I was missing. That question felt very important at the time, so I tried to be helpful. I walked toward places that made sense to me. The ice cream stand, either because that's where I had been. The benches, because that's where people often stopped. The main paths where people walked back and forth. I thought that if I stayed in places like that, it would be easier for him to find me. Looking back, that thought process is painful. I was a small child, alone in a crowded seaside area, wandering around calmly, believing I was making a smart decision. I didn't understand that the safest thing to do would have been to stay exactly where I was. I didn't know that moving around could actually make it harder for the people looking for me. I didn't know how vulnerable I was. I just knew I wanted to be found. At some point, a couple noticed me. I don't remember the exact moment they first spoke to me, but I remember the feeling. They didn't startle me. They didn't scare me. They didn't grab me. They just stopped and asked if I was okay. They asked who I was with. Their voices were calm and friendly, the way adults often speak to children. I told them I was looking for my granddad. That was it. No fear in my voice, no suspicion, just a simple statement of fact. I trusted them immediately, without hesitation. They sounded kind. They sounded like people who wanted to help. In my mind, that was enough. They told me they would help me find him. At the time, I didn't question that either. It felt natural. Adults help kids. That was the rule of the world as I understood it. I followed them without thinking about alternatives, without worrying about what could happen if they weren't who they said they were. The couple took me to the police. That part of the day stands out more clearly than the wandering. I remember the police officers, their uniforms, and the way everything suddenly felt serious and structured. The officers spoke gently, asking me questions in a way that didn't make me feel scared. They asked what my granddad looked like, what he was wearing, where I had last seen him. I tried my best to answer, even though some of the details were fuzzy. Then they put me in the police car. As a kid, that felt exciting more than anything else. It felt important. I didn't think about how strange it was to be sitting in a police car because I was lost. I didn't feel fear. I felt like things were finally being handled properly. They drove slowly around the area, looking through the crowds. We didn't have to look for long. When I saw my granddad, I recognized him immediately. He was pacing, scanning the area, his body tense in a way I hadn't seen before. Even from a distance, I could tell something was wrong. When he saw me, his face changed completely. The relief was instant and obvious. He hurried over, hugged me tightly, and kept apologizing over and over again. I remember feeling safe again, like everything had snapped back into place. To me, the story ended right there. We went home. Life went on. The day became something people talked about occasionally, usually with a laugh. When we got back, my granny was furious with my granddad. That part became a family joke over time. He got in trouble, and everyone teased him about it. But underneath the humor, there was real fear. They had all been terrified, even if I hadn't understood it at the time. As a child, I didn't fully grasp what had happened. As an adult, I can't stop thinking about it. Now, when I hear stories about children going missing, even briefly, my stomach tightens. When I see headlines about kidnappings or about people pretending to help, I think back to that day and feel a cold wave of realization. I think about how easily it could have gone another way, how I trusted the first adults who spoke to me, how I followed them without question, how the outcome depended entirely on the fact that they were good people. I didn't get home safely because I was clever. I got home safely because they were decent. That realization is uncomfortable. It forces you to accept how thin the line really is between safety and disaster. It makes you understand that childhood innocence isn't protection, it's vulnerability. And whether a situation ends well often has very little to do with the child involved and everything to do with the intentions of the adults around them. See, I think about how calm I was while wandering around, ice cream melting in my hand, believing everything would work out. I think about how my granddad must have felt during that same stretch of time. The panic rising as he realized I wasn't there, the fear tightening in his chest as minutes passed. We were living the same moment in completely different emotional worlds. That contrast is hard to sit with. The older I get, the more I understand why adults worry the way they do. Why they hold children's hands tightly in crowded places. Why they teach kids to stay put if they get lost. Why they repeat the same rules over and over, even when it seems excessive or annoying. It's not paranoia. It's experience. It's knowing how quickly things can go wrong and how little control you sometimes have once they do. Oh, that day at the seaside didn't leave me with trauma in the traditional sense. I don't have nightmares about it. I'm not afraid of crowds. But it changed something quietly, retroactively. As my understanding of the world grew, the memory changed shape. What once felt harmless now feels heavy with what-ifs. I still believe most people are good. I have to believe that. But I also know now that not everyone is, and that children, especially, don't have the tools to tell the difference. They rely entirely on the adults around them to keep them safe, whether those adults are family, strangers, or professionals doing their jobs. Whenever I see a lost child reunited with their family, I feel a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that the story ended well. Sadness for the fear that happened in between, or even if the child doesn't remember it clearly. I think back to my own story and how easily it could have turned into something far worse. I walked away from that day with nothing more than a story. It could have been a warning. It could have been a tragedy. Instead, it became a reminder. A reminder of how much trust we carry when we're young and how quickly that trust can put us in danger without us ever realizing it. A reminder of how important it is that the world be kind, because children assume it already is. I'm grateful every day that my story ended the way it did, because it so easily could have ended differently. I've had a few strange experiences in my life, but these two moments stand out because of how sudden and disorienting they were. Neither of them fits neatly into a category. One felt harmless but deeply unsettling. The other was very real, very physical, and left a lasting mark on how safe I felt when I was alone. What ties them together is how quickly an ordinary moment can turn into something that shakes you. One afternoon, my brother and I were sitting in his room. It wasn't late. It wasn't dark. Nothing about the day felt off. I had come in because I wanted to show him something I found on the internet. Just a normal sibling moment, sitting next to each other, half paying attention, half bored, killing time. His room was quiet. No TV on, no music playing. Just the soft hum of the house and whatever noise drifted in from outside. We were home alone at the time, and our dogs weren't there either, which mattered more than I realized in that moment. Usually, if there was any kind of noise in the house, the dogs would react. They'd bark, run around, or at least lift their heads. But this time, the house was completely still. Then we heard it. Laughter. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't distant. It sounded close, like it was coming from inside the same room we were sitting in. It was sudden enough that both of us froze at the exact same time. For a split second, my heart jumped, but almost immediately my brain latched onto an explanation. It's a laughing bag, one of those stupid novelty toys that laughs when you squeeze it. I had heard them before. That kind of laughter is distinctive, artificial, over the top. It doesn't sound human, but it sounds close enough to trigger a reaction before logic kicks in. The strange part wasn't the sound itself. It was where it seemed to come from. It sounded like it was right there with us. I remember feeling a rush of confusion. I knew what the sound was, but I couldn't figure out how it could be happening. We were home alone. No one else was there to prank us. There were no dogs to step on it by accident. I didn't remember seeing a laughing bag anywhere in the room, and I'm usually very aware of objects like that. I'm good at locating sounds. Always have been. I can usually tell where something is coming from almost instantly. Left or right, near or far. Upstairs or downstairs. But this time, I couldn't pinpoint it. It was like the sound had no clear origin. It just existed in the space around us. And I got up immediately and started looking around the room. Under the bed, behind the door, in the closet, on shelves, in drawers. Nothing. No laughing bag, no toy, no object that could have made that noise. I checked everywhere it could reasonably be, and then places where it absolutely shouldn't have been. My brother watched me, silent now, just as unsettled as I was. The laughter didn't repeat itself. It happened once, clearly, and then never again. That made it worse. If it had kept going, maybe I could have tracked it down. Maybe it would have led me to something obvious. But it didn't. It was like the sound had never existed at all, except that both of us heard it. We stood there for a moment, not really knowing what to say. I tried to laugh it off, but it came out forced. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe sound from outside traveled in a weird way. Maybe it came from another house. Maybe it was some electronic device glitching. But none of those explanations felt right. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel the same. That sense of normalcy was cracked just enough to let unease slip in. Eventually, we went back to what we were doing, but the moment lingered. Even now, I can still hear that laugh in my head. Not because it was terrifying, but because it didn't belong there. The second experience was very different. This one wasn't confusing in a quiet, unsettling way. It was loud, aggressive, and terrifying in a very real sense. And unlike the first incident, there was no mystery about whether it happened or not. I was home alone again on a different day. This time, I truly was alone. No brother in the next room, no parents, no dogs. The house was empty in that specific way that makes you aware of every sound. I remember feeling relaxed at first. I was doing my own thing, not expecting anyone, not worried about anything. Then someone came into the house. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. It all happened so fast that my brain struggled to keep up. A person suddenly appeared wearing one of those scream masks. The kind you recognize instantly from movies and Halloween costumes. The white, stretched face, the hollow eyes, the exaggerated mouth. For a split second, my brain tried to categorize it as a prank. Then he attacked me. There was no warning, no joke, no pause. He lunged at me and grabbed me by the throat. His hands closed around my neck, tight enough that I immediately started to panic. My body reacted before my mind did. Oh, my heart slammed against my chest. My arms flailed instinctively. I couldn't get a proper breath. He was someone I recognized, or at least someone I knew of. A friend of my brother. Someone who had been in our house before. Someone who should not have been doing this. That made it even worse. This wasn't a stranger breaking in. This was someone connected to my life. Someone who knew where I lived, who knew I might be alone. That realization hit me hard, even as I was struggling to breathe. He had a knife. I don't know if it was plastic or not. In that moment, it didn't matter. My brain didn't stop to analyze it. All I saw was a blade in his hand, and that was enough to flood me with fear. My thoughts scattered. Every instinct screamed that I was in danger. He choked me, hard enough that the edges of my vision started to blur. I remember the pressure, the way my throat felt crushed, the way my body felt weaker with every second. I remember the smell of the mask, the sound of my own breathing turning into desperate gasps. I remember thinking that this couldn't be happening, that it felt unreal, like a nightmare, except it hurt. It was physical. There was no waking up from it. Eventually, it stopped. I don't remember every detail of how it ended. Adrenaline does strange things to memory. What I do remember is the aftermath. The shaking, the shock, the way my body felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. The way the house, once familiar, suddenly felt hostile and unsafe. He left. I was alone again, but everything was different. That incident stayed with me in a way the laughing sound never could. The laughter was confusing and creepy, but this was traumatic. It changed how I felt about being home alone. It changed how I felt about people I thought I could trust. It taught me brutally that danger doesn't always come from strangers or dark corners. Sometimes it comes wearing a familiar face. For a long time afterward, I couldn't relax when I was alone. Every sound made me tense. Every unexpected noise made my heart jump. I replayed the moment over and over in my head, wondering what I could have done differently, wondering how close I had been to something even worse happening. Looking back, the contrast between these two experiences is strange. One involved something harmless, maybe even silly, a laughing toy sound with no clear source. The other involved real violence and fear. But both moments share something important. They both happened when I least expected them. They both took an ordinary situation and twisted it into something that didn't feel safe anymore. And they both left me with a lingering sense that control can vanish in an instant. The laughing sound still bothers me because I never found an answer. It sits in my memory as an unresolved question. The attack bothers me because it answered a question I wish I'd never had to ask, about how vulnerable I really was. Neither experience fits neatly into a scary story you tell for fun. One is too quiet, the other is too real. But both are moments I still think about, moments that taught me how fragile normal can be. Sometimes fear doesn't come with a warning. Sometimes it laughs once and disappears. And sometimes it wears a mask and takes your breath away. Both can leave a mark. This is another one of those stories that's been passed around in my family for years. And even though it didn't happen to me directly, it still unsettles me every time I think about it. It happened to my uncle when he was about 12 years old, back when he was just a kid who cared about cartoons, action figures, and hanging out with his friends. What makes it so creepy is how ordinary everything was before it turned strange, and how little explanation there ever was for what happened. When my uncle was growing up, he had a close friend he spent a lot of time with. He practically lived at this kid's house. According to both my uncle and my mom, that house had a reputation even back then. It was old, much older than most of the other houses in the area, and it had that kind of heavy or uncomfortable feeling you notice the moment you walk inside. The walls creaked, the floors groaned, and the air always felt colder than it should have, especially in the lower levels. His friend's bedroom was in the basement, which already made things feel off. It wasn't a finished basement like you see in newer houses with carpet and bright lights. It was darker, more industrial, with concrete walls and exposed pipes. Right next to the bedroom was the boiler room, where the furnace and all the mechanical stuff was kept. Even during the day, that part of the basement felt creepy. At night, it was worse. The parents were often out in the evenings. They trusted their son and my uncle enough to leave them alone for a few hours, which was pretty normal back then. So many nights it would just be the two boys down in the basement watching TV, either playing games or messing around like kids do. At least that's what my uncle wanted to do. But there was something strange about his friend. As it got later in the night, his friend would start to change. He'd get quiet, restless, nervous. My uncle noticed it more than once. Around a certain time, his friend would suddenly stop wanting to watch TV or play games. My uncle would suggest staying up, maybe watching something fun or playing a video game, but his friend would always shut it down. No, we should go to bed. That was it. No explanation, no argument. He'd just insist they go into his room, turn off all the lights, and lie down. Even if it wasn't that late. Even if they weren't tired. At 12 years old, my uncle didn't think too deeply about it at first. He figured maybe his friend was scared of the dark basement or just had strict rules from his parents. Still, it was odd. Most kids that age want to stay up as late as possible, especially when their parents aren't home. But his friend seemed almost relieved once they were in bed with the lights off, like that was the safest place to be. One night, everything changed. It was like any other night at first. His parents went out, leaving the two boys alone in the house. They went down to the basement, hung out for a bit, and eventually, just like always, his friend insisted they go to bed. They shut off the lights and lay down in the dark. His friend climbed into his bed, and my uncle lay on the floor using a blanket and a pillow he'd brought from upstairs. The room was quiet. My uncle lay there on his back, staring up into the darkness, his mind wandering the way kids' minds do. He was thinking about Ninja Turtles, cartoons, toys, whatever he was obsessed with at the time. He wasn't scared. He wasn't even uncomfortable yet. Just bored, waiting to fall asleep. Then something happened. The lights in the main area of the basement turned on. Not the light in the bedroom, the light outside the room, in the open basement area. A bright, sudden light that spilled under the crack of the bedroom door and across the floor. It was unexpected, but it didn't immediately scare him. His first thought was simple and logical. His friend's parents must be home. That made sense. They had been out for a while. Maybe they came back earlier than usual. My uncle relaxed a little, expecting to hear voices or footsteps on the stairs. Then the music started. It wasn't faint. It wasn't like someone humming or a radio barely playing. It was clear, loud enough to be unmistakable. Music coming from somewhere in the basement, just outside the bedroom. My uncle couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from, but it sounded like something you'd play on a stereo, something casual, something normal. He still wasn't too worried. Parents come home. They turn on lights. They play music. That's normal. Then he noticed something else. Under the crack of the bedroom door, he could see movement. Feet, boots, heavy boots, walking back and forth across the basement floor. He could see the shadows clearly. Someone pacing, stopping, turning, moving again. The boots weren't rushing. They weren't sneaking, they were just walking around, like whoever it was felt completely comfortable being down there. When this went on for several minutes, at first my uncle just lay there, listening. He expected his friend to say something, maybe complain that his parents were being loud or get up to say hi to them. But his friend didn't move. He didn't speak. He stayed completely still in his bed. That's when my uncle started to feel uneasy. 10 minutes passed. The light stayed on. The music kept playing. The boots continued to walk back and forth. No voices. No one came to the door. No one called down to them. My uncle started replaying everything in his head. If the parents were home, why hadn't they said anything? Why hadn't they checked on them? Why were they just pacing around the basement instead of going upstairs? He tried to whisper to his friend, asking if his parents were home. His friend didn't answer. He whispered again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. His friend lay there, stiff and silent, as if pretending to be asleep, or as if he was too scared to respond. That was when the fear really set in. My uncle realized something wasn't right. His friend's earlier behavior suddenly made sense in a way that made his stomach twist. Maybe there was a reason he always wanted to turn off the lights and go to bed early. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The music cut off. The footsteps stopped. The lights in the basement went out. The silence that followed felt heavy and unnatural. It wasn't the calm silence of a house at rest. It was sharp, tense, like the air itself was holding its breath. My uncle lay there, heart pounding, afraid to move. A few moments later, he heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of the front door opening upstairs. Voices. His friend's parents laughing and talking as they came into the house. This time, it was unmistakable. They had just arrived, which meant they hadn't been home before. There was no one else who should have been in that basement. The lights outside the bedroom stayed off. No music played. No footsteps returned. The basement was quiet again, like nothing had ever happened. My uncle didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he worked up the courage to ask his friend's parents about it. He tried to sound casual, like he wasn't scared, like he was just curious. He asked if they had come home earlier the night before and gone back out again. He asked if they had been in the basement playing music. They looked confused. No, they hadn't come home until late. They hadn't been in the basement at all. They hadn't played any music. They hadn't walked around downstairs. Nothing like that. When my uncle told them what he had heard and seen, they brushed it off. Old houses make noise. Lights flicker. Maybe he imagined it. Maybe he was half asleep. But they didn't have a real explanation, and they didn't seem eager to talk about it either. My uncle never stayed over at that house again. Years later, when he told this story, he admitted something he hadn't said at the time. That his friend had later confessed he heard it too. He had heard the music. He had seen the light under the door. He had known exactly what was happening, which was why he stayed completely still and silent. It wasn't the first time something like that had happened in the house. That's why he always wanted to go to bed early. Then that's why he shut off the lights. That's why he never wanted to be awake late at night in that basement. Whatever it was, it didn't hurt anyone. It didn't try to get into the room. It didn't speak. It just existed there, walking around, acting as if it belonged in that space, until it was time to leave. The fact that it stopped right before the parents came home is what makes the story so disturbing. It's like whatever was down there knew when it had to go. Like it was aware of who was supposed to be in the house and who wasn't. To this day, my uncle doesn't like basements. He doesn't like boiler rooms. He doesn't like houses that feel too old or too quiet. And whenever this story comes up, he always says the same thing. The scariest part wasn't the music. It wasn't the lights. It wasn't even the boots walking back and forth. It was the silence afterward. Because in that silence, he realized something had been there with them, and no one ever found out what it was. This happened back in 2006, during a time that should have been full of noise, laughter, and normal family chaos. My cousins were visiting from Brazil, staying with us for a while, and the house felt busier than usual. Extra people meant extra movement, extra voices, doors opening and closing more often, dogs getting excited more often. Nothing about that part was strange. It was the kind of situation where you expect the house to feel alive. That's part of why what happened still bothers me. On that particular day, my mom and one of my cousins decided to go out shopping together. They were only supposed to be gone for a short while. Nothing late, nothing unusual, just a normal trip out of the house. My dad, my other cousin, and I stayed downstairs in the living room. We were watching TV, half paying attention. The way you do when you're relaxed and not expecting anything out of the ordinary. Our dogs were upstairs at the time. They usually hung around near the bedrooms or the top of the stairs when people were out. They had a very specific habit. Every single time someone came home, without fail, they would hear it before any of us did. The sound of the door, footsteps, keys, whatever it was, they always knew. And they would immediately run down the stairs to greet whoever had just arrived. That detail matters more than it should. While we were sitting there watching TV, all three of us heard it. We heard the front door open. We heard footsteps inside the house. We heard someone moving through the hallway and going up the stairs. It sounded exactly like my mom and cousin coming home. Nothing strange about the sound itself. No crashes. No strange noises. Just normal, familiar movement. The kind of sound your brain doesn't question because you've heard it 1,000 times before. At the exact same moment, the dogs reacted. They came flying down the stairs, nails clicking on the steps, excited, tails wagging, heading straight for the front door. They were doing exactly what they always did when someone came home. They didn't hesitate. They didn't act confused. They didn't stop halfway down the stairs. They ran all the way down like they were sure someone was there. My dad glanced toward the door, but none of us got up. There was no reason to. We assumed it was my mom and cousin. They had been gone long enough. It made sense. Everything lined up. A couple of minutes passed. Then the front door opened again. This time, we all looked up. My mom and my cousin walked in, bags in hand, talking to each other, laughing about something from the store. The dogs went crazy all over again, barking and circling them, just as excited as before. That's when my dad froze. He looked at my mom and said, "Wait, how did you get there?" My mom looked confused. She asked what he meant. He told her that we had already heard them come home, that we heard the door open, that we heard someone go past us and walk upstairs, that the dogs had run down to greet them. She laughed at first, thinking he was joking. Then she realized he wasn't. She told us they had just pulled into the driveway. They hadn't been home earlier. They hadn't stopped by and left again. They had been out the entire time. The room went quiet. My other cousin and I looked at each other. We both knew what we heard. It wasn't vague. Yeah, it wasn't something you could easily misinterpret. The sound had been clear and close. Someone had been inside the house. Someone had gone up the stairs. And the dogs heard it too. That was the part that made it hard to brush off. Dogs don't imagine things the way people do. They don't politely pretend someone came home. They react to sound, movement, presence, and they reacted exactly the way they always did when someone came through the door. We all started talking at once, trying to piece it together. Maybe someone had tried to break in, but nothing was disturbed. No doors unlocked, no signs of forced entry, no missing items. And if someone had come in, why would they go upstairs and then disappear without a trace? Maybe the sound came from outside? But we were inside, and it sounded like it came from the front door and hallway, and not from the street. And the dogs didn't react like they do to outside noise. They reacted like someone was inside the house. Maybe one of us imagined it, but all three of us heard it, independently, at the same time. And the dogs reacted before any of us even spoke. We went upstairs to check. Every room was empty. No doors open that shouldn't have been. No windows open. No signs that anyone had been there. The house looked exactly the same as it had before. That's when the uneasiness set in. It wasn't fear at first. It was confusion. The kind that makes your brain itch because it can't find a place to put the experience. Nothing about it fit neatly into logic. There was no obvious explanation that satisfied all the details. Over the next few days, we talked about it on and off. My mom tried to laugh it off. I saying maybe the house just made noise. Maybe the stairs creaked in a weird way. But my dad wasn't convinced. He's not someone who jumps to paranormal conclusions, but he also doesn't like dismissing things that clearly happened. The more we replayed it, the stranger it felt. The timing was perfect. The sounds matched exactly what we expected to hear. The dogs responded exactly how they always did. And then, moments later, the real version of the event happened again, as if the house was replaying something that hadn't occurred yet. Nothing else like that ever happened again in the same way. We didn't hear footsteps that weren't there. We didn't hear doors opening by themselves. The dogs didn't react to empty spaces the same way after that. The house went back to being normal, at least on the surface. But that one moment stuck. Sometimes it's the quiet, simple stories that are the hardest to explain away. There was no shadow figure, no voice, no object moving on its own. Just a very ordinary sound happening at the wrong time, confirmed by multiple people and animals. Years later, I still think about it. I think about how easily we trust our senses when they match our expectations. If my mom and cousin had actually been home at that moment, we wouldn't have questioned it for a second. The sound would have blended into memory as just another normal day. But because reality didn't line up, it stood out in a way that refused to fade. I've heard people talk about something called auditory echoes or residual sounds, like a house replaying familiar noises. I've also heard people talk about stress, coincidence, or the brain filling in gaps, Maybe there's a rational explanation buried somewhere that we just didn't find. But I always come back to the dogs. They didn't know what we expected to hear. They didn't know my mom was supposed to come home around that time. They just reacted. And they reacted with certainty. That's what makes it linger in my mind. Nothing bad happened that day. No one got hurt. There was no follow-up event that confirmed anything supernatural. Life went on. My cousins eventually went back to Brazil. The house returned to its usual rhythm. Still, every once in a while when I hear footsteps in a quiet house, or hear a door open when I don't expect it, I think back to that moment. To sitting on the couch, hearing someone come home who hadn't yet arrived. To the dogs running down the stairs, tails wagging, convinced someone was there. And I wonder what it was we heard. A coincidence, a trick of sound, or something else entirely. I don't pretend to know the answer. I just know what we experienced. And sometimes, not knowing is the part that sticks with you the longest. I saw this on television a while ago, and it is one of those stories that settled into my mind and refused to leave. I didn't sit down intending to watch something disturbing. I was just flipping through channels, half paying attention, expecting the usual kind of educational content that feels distant and contained. Something you watch, think about for a moment, and then move on from. Instead, I came across a story that felt far too real, far too close to human suffering. And once I understood what I was seeing, I couldn't look at the world the same way again. The program focused on the killings of people with albinism in Tanzania. I had heard vague references to this before, usually in passing, usually without detail. It was always framed as something tragic but distant, the kind of headline you acknowledge without truly absorbing. Well, watching this documentary changed that completely. As it unfolded, it became painfully clear that this was not an isolated problem or a rare crime committed by a few individuals. It was part of a broader, deeply rooted pattern driven by superstition, fear, poverty, and exploitation. In certain regions, people with albinism are targeted because of beliefs connected to traditional witchcraft. There is a widespread myth that parts of their bodies contain special powers. Some believe these body parts can bring wealth, success, protection, or good fortune. Because of these beliefs, limbs and other body parts are sold on the black market for large sums of money. The people who believe in this do not see those with albinism as human beings. They are reduced to objects, to commodities, to something that can be harvested and sold. That realization alone was horrifying, but the documentary went further. It put faces and lives to the statistics, showing families, villages, and individuals living in constant fear. People who could not safely walk outside at night. Children who had to be escorted to school or kept indoors for their own protection. Parents who lived with the knowledge that the very thing that made their child unique also made them a target. One specific case described in the program has never left me. It was the story of a family with two sisters, both of whom had albinism. They lived in a very remote area, in a small hut far from cities or infrastructure. There was no electricity, no streetlights, no phones, no easy way to contact help. When night fell, it was truly dark, the kind of darkness that feels complete and suffocating, where you cannot see your own hand in front of your face. One night while they were sleeping, attackers came. They didn't come in a rush or in panic. They came with purpose. They went after one of the sisters, and what they did to her was beyond cruel. The violence was not random. It was calculated. Her arms and legs were taken so they could be sold, not out of rage, not out of desperation in the moment, but for profit, for money tied to superstition, for beliefs that turned her body into something valuable only once it was destroyed. The documentary did not dramatize this. It did not rely on graphic imagery. It didn't need to. The facts themselves were enough to make it unbearable. But what truly broke me was what happened after. The other sister, also a person with albinism, lay beside her for the rest of the night. Yet there was nothing she could do. No light to see clearly. No tools. No way to stop the bleeding. No way to call for help. No one coming. Just darkness, silence, fear, and the slow realization that her sister was dying right next to her. She stayed there until morning came, and by then it was too late. That image has never left my mind. Not because it was shocking in a sensational way, but because of how quiet it was, how human it was. Two sisters lying side by side in the dark, one fading away, the other fully aware of what was happening and completely powerless to stop it. That kind of suffering doesn't need gore or exaggeration to be horrifying. The simplicity of it is what makes it devastating. What made the story even harder to process was how preventable it felt. These were not accidents. This was not nature at work. This was not an unavoidable tragedy. These were crimes driven by belief systems that strip people of their humanity. People were being targeted not because of something they had done, but because of how they were born, because of genetics, because of appearance. I remember sitting there after the program ended, staring at the screen long after the credits rolled. I felt hollow, heavy. It made me think about how drastically different life can be depending on where you're born. In some places, albinism might mean dealing with ignorance, discrimination, or social challenges. In other places, it can mean living under constant threat of violence or death. The idea that parts of a human body can be assigned a price because of superstition is deeply disturbing. It turns people into raw materials. It creates an economy of violence, where belief fuels demand and poverty fuels supply. Once something like that exists, it becomes incredibly difficult to stop because it is no longer just about belief. It is about money, power, and desperation. What disturbed me most was how alone these victims often are. Many live in remote areas with little protection. Law enforcement may be weak or far away. Resources are limited. Education is inconsistent. Poverty pushes people toward beliefs and actions they might otherwise question. All of these factors come together to create a perfect storm where the most vulnerable are left exposed. After watching the documentary, I couldn't stop thinking about the sister who survived. Not just about that night, but about everything that would come after. The trauma of lying there, helpless, while her sister died. The grief. The fear. The knowledge that her own body made her a target. That she might never feel safe again, even in her own home, even in daylight. It messed with my head because it shattered the idea that the worst forms of cruelty are rare or random. Sometimes they are systematic. Sometimes they are justified in the minds of those committing them by tradition or belief. That realization is far more disturbing than any fictional horror story. I have watched many dark documentaries. I have read about wars, crimes, and atrocities throughout history. Most of them upset me in the moment and then fade into the background of everything else I know about the world. This one didn't. This one felt different. It wasn't ancient history. It wasn't exaggerated for dramatic effect. It was happening in the modern world, to real people, often far from cameras. Some far from headlines, far from international attention. Even now, when I think about it, I feel that same weight in my chest. A mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief that something so brutal can be normalized through superstition. That entire communities can grow around beliefs that justify harming innocent people. It forces you to confront how fragile safety really is, and how easily humanity can be stripped away when fear and greed take over. Some stories stay with you because they are frightening. Others stay with you because they reveal something deeply broken about the world. This one did both. I was 8 years old when this happened, and even though it wasn't scary in the usual way people think of scary stories, it has stayed with me just as clearly as some of the more unsettling things I've experienced. It's one of those memories that hits you out of nowhere, usually at the worst possible moment, and instantly makes you cringe. No matter how much time passes, it never really becomes less uncomfortable or less embarrassing. If anything, it somehow gets worse the older you get, because you understand it more. That weekend, my parents dropped my brother and me off at our grandparents' house. They were heading up to New York City with my sister to see a very expensive mental health specialist, and the trip was going to take the entire weekend. At 8 years old, I didn't really understand what was going on. I knew my sister wasn't doing well, but I didn't grasp the seriousness of it or why the doctor mattered so much. Adult problems existed in a vague, distant way back then. All I really understood was that my parents were leaving, and my brother and I were staying with our grandparents. To us, that felt like a small adventure. Our grandparents' house was old, quiet, and full of routines. They were both in their 70s at the time. They were kind, gentle people, but very set in their ways. The house smelled like old furniture, clean laundry, and whatever my grandmother had cooked that day. It was the kind of place where everything had its proper spot, and nothing ever really changed. One of the most important things about staying there was their bedtime. They went to bed early. Very early. Earlier than anyone else we knew. By the time my brother and I were tucked in, they were usually already half asleep themselves. And almost as soon as our parents drove away that Friday evening, my brother and I started planning. We realized something very important. Once our grandparents went to sleep, we could stay up late. Not just stay up late, but watch television. And not the boring, safe shows we were allowed to watch at home. We were talking about shows we were absolutely not supposed to see. The kind with bad language, adult jokes, or things our parents would never approve of. To an 8-year-old, this felt like a golden opportunity that might never come again. There was just one problem. The living room. The main television was in the living room, and that was risky. My grandmother had a habit of falling asleep in her chair with the TV still on. She also snored. Loudly. Not gentle, quiet snoring, but the kind that rattled the room. The problem was that she could wake up at any moment. One noise, one sudden sound from the TV, and we would be caught instantly. So we needed a better plan. That's when we thought about our grandfather's bedroom. Our grandfather had his own room, but as far as we knew, he didn't really sleep in it anymore. At least, that's what we believed. We had never seen him go to bed there. In our minds, he either fell asleep in the living room chair or shared the bedroom with our grandmother. His room was just sort of there, unused, forgotten, and it had a TV. To our young minds, this was perfect. His bedroom was down the hall, away from the living room, and the door could be closed. We could sneak in, turn on the TV quietly, and watch whatever we wanted without any risk of being caught. It felt clever, brilliant even. So we waited. We sat quietly, pretending to be tired, yawning dramatically, waiting for our grandparents to go to bed. We watched the clock, whispering to each other, barely containing our excitement. Eventually, the lights went off. The TV was turned off. The house grew quiet. Around 11 o'clock, everything was silent. No television noise, no footsteps, no snoring drifting down the hallway. The house felt completely asleep. The only sound was the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the distance. We looked at each other and nodded. It was time. We slipped out of our room and walked down the hallway together. We moved slowly, carefully, placing our feet softly on the floor. The house was dim, lit only by a small nightlight that cast long shadows on the walls. Everything felt bigger at night, longer, quieter, more serious. But we weren't scared. We were excited. In our minds, our grandparents were sound asleep, either in my grandmother's bedroom or passed out in the living room. There was no reason to think otherwise. As we got closer to our grandfather's bedroom door, we heard something. The bed was moving. There was a soft, rhythmic sound coming from inside the room. The mattress creaked slightly, shifting back and forth in a steady pattern. We stopped in the hallway and looked at each other. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Our excitement turned into confusion. What could that be? Then we remembered the cats. My grandmother had several cats, 4 or 5 of them at any given time. So they were always roaming the house, jumping on furniture, chasing each other, knocking things over. It wasn't unusual for them to climb onto beds and cause noise, especially at night. That explanation made sense to us. It was innocent, harmless. Relieved, we didn't think any further. We didn't knock. My brother reached out and opened the door wide. What happened next is burned into my memory forever. Our grandparents were on the bed, together, having sex. For a brief moment, my brain simply could not process what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. It didn't match anything I understood about the world. They were positioned in a spooning kind of way, and everything about it felt wrong to my 8-year-old mind. Then reality hit. They were old. Very old. Wrinkled. Naked in ways I had never imagined and never wanted to imagine. And then there was the sound. The unmistakable sound of skin slapping against skin, combined with the bed creaking beneath them. That sound did something to my soul. I froze. My brother froze. Time seemed to stop. My mind screamed at me that this was something I was not supposed to see, something I could never unsee. I don't remember if either of us actually screamed out loud, but inside my head, everything was chaos. Panic, confusion, disgust, and shock all crashed into each other at once. The door slammed shut. We ran. We ran like our lives depended on it. Back down the hallway, away from that room, away from that image, toward anywhere that felt safe. My heart was pounding. My face felt hot. I wanted to crawl out of my own body. I don't remember if my grandparents saw us clearly. I don't remember if they said anything or tried to explain. I don't remember if they even had time to react before the door closed. Those details are gone, lost in the blur of pure panic. All I remember is the image, and the sound, and the sudden, horrifying realization that grandparents are, in fact, human beings who do adult things. Nothing in my life had prepared me for that knowledge. The rest of the weekend passed in a strange, uncomfortable haze. No one mentioned what happened. My brother and I didn't talk about it with each other. We didn't laugh about it. We didn't whisper about it. We didn't even acknowledge it privately. It was like we both understood, without saying a word, that this was something better left buried. Our grandparents didn't bring it up either. No awkward conversations, no apologies, no explanations. It was as if an unspoken agreement formed instantly between all of us. This never happened. This will never be discussed. We will all pretend this moment does not exist. But of course, that's not how memories work. You can pretend something didn't happen all you want, but your brain doesn't forget. It stores the image away, sealed tight, and then brings it back when you least expect it. Years later, decades later, at the worst possible time. Even now, thinking about it makes my skin crawl. It's not fear I feel. It's pure concentrated disgust mixed with secondhand embarrassment that somehow still exists long after the moment has passed. It's the kind of discomfort that makes you physically tense, like your body is trying to protect you from the memory itself. That night taught me a very important lesson. One that no child should have to learn firsthand. Never sneak into rooms you don't belong in. And never ever assume that old people don't have sex. It wasn't a ghost story. There was nothing supernatural about it. No mystery. No unexplained event. Everything that happened had a very clear, very human explanation. And in its own way, that made it worse. Because some experiences don't need to be frightening to haunt you. Some are just deeply, painfully unforgettable. And no matter how much time passes, some images stay burned into your brain forever, waiting to resurface when you least want them to. I was 15 years old when this happened, and even now, years later, it still sits quietly in my mind, in a way I can't fully shake. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. There were no shadows or strange sounds or things moving where they shouldn't. What made it unsettling was how calm it was, how ordinary everything looked on the surface, and how meaningful it felt once I understood what had happened. That night, I was babysitting my 4 nephews. 2 of them were my brother's biological children, and the other 2 were from my brother's partner, but to me, they were all just my nephews. Family was family. At the time, the 2 youngest were the ones I was most focused on. One was just 18 months old, still a baby really, and the other was 4 years old. The older 2 were easier, and they slept through the night most of the time and rarely needed anything once they were in bed. The house was quiet that night, the kind of quiet you only get after midnight when everything has settled. The lights were dim, most of them turned off, and the only real light in the living room came from a small lamp near the couch. I was sitting there reading a book, trying to stay awake but also enjoying the calm. Babysitting late at night usually meant nothing happened at all. You just waited, listened, made sure everyone stayed asleep. The baby's room was directly behind the living room. If I leaned my head back just a little, I could almost hear him breathing through the wall. The 4-year-old's room was upstairs, along with his older brother, who was sleeping in the same room. Neither of them usually woke up during the night. And they were good sleepers, especially the older one. Once they were out, they were out. That's why the sound caught my attention immediately. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a scream or a crash. It was just a noise upstairs, soft but wrong enough to pull me out of my book instantly. It sounded like movement, maybe footsteps, maybe someone shifting around. My first thought was that one of the older kids had gotten up to use the bathroom, but something about the timing felt off. I put the book down and stood up, listening. The house was still otherwise quiet. No TV, no music. Just that faint sound from upstairs. I remember feeling slightly uneasy, but not scared. More alert than anything. I walked to the stairs and went up slowly, trying not to make noise. When I reached the bedroom, I saw the 4-year-old out of bed. He was standing there, not fully crying, but softly sobbing. The kind of crying kids do when they're half asleep and don't really know why they're upset. His eyes were open but unfocused. He looked confused, like he wasn't fully awake yet. His older brother was still asleep in the bed, completely undisturbed, breathing evenly like nothing had happened at all. I knelt down in front of him and asked him what was wrong. He looked at me for a moment, clearly trying to understand the question. Then he shrugged slightly and said he didn't know. There was no story, no nightmare, no complaint, just confusion. He seemed tired, disoriented, and a little sad, but not frightened. I talked to him quietly, rubbing his back, telling him everything was okay. While I was doing that, I suddenly heard the baby start crying downstairs. That made me pause, and the baby almost never woke up at night, especially not around the same time as the older one. The timing felt strange, but again, I didn't jump to any conclusions. Babies cry, kids wake up. It happens. I told the 4-year-old to stay where he was for a moment and went back downstairs. The baby was awake in his crib, crying harder than usual. Not panicked, but clearly upset. I picked him up and held him against my shoulder, rocking him gently. He calmed down after a few minutes, his crying fading into small hiccups. I remember feeling tired but patient, focused on getting both kids back to sleep. Once the baby was calm, I carried him upstairs and brought him into the other room. I sat with both of them for a while, making sure they were okay. I tucked the 4-year-old back into bed, pulled the blankets up around him, and stayed there until his eyes closed again. The baby was already drifting off by the time I laid him back down. Everything went quiet again. I stood there for a moment, looking at the two of them, listening to their breathing, making sure they were really asleep this time. There was no fear in me at that point, just a sense of relief that the situation was handled. Kids wake up sometimes. That was all. I went back downstairs to the living room. As soon as I sat down, my phone rang. The sound was sharp in the quiet house, and it made me jump a little. I looked at the screen and saw my mom's name. I remember thinking it was strange for her to be calling that late, especially since she knew I was babysitting. I answered the phone. Her voice was different. She told me that my grandmother had just died. There was no build-up, no easing into it. Just the words, spoken softly but firmly. She said it had just happened, that they had gotten the call moments ago, that there was nothing anyone could do. I sat there in silence, listening, trying to process what she was saying. My grandmother was old, yes, but death still hits you the same way no matter how prepared you think you are. It feels unreal at first, like the words don't quite land. After I hung up the phone, I sat there for a long time. That's when it hit me. The timing. The kids had woken up right around the same time my grandmother had died. Both of them. For no clear reason, no nightmares, no loud noises, no changes in the house. The baby and the 4-year-old had both woken up suddenly, at almost the exact same moment after sleeping peacefully for hours. I went cold. I remember looking toward the hallway that led to the stairs, thinking about how the 4-year-old had been standing there, crying softly, not knowing why. How the baby had woken up almost immediately after. How neither of them could explain it, because of course they couldn't. They were too young. I didn't tell them anything, obviously. They were children. They didn't need to know. I finished the night quietly, sitting in the living room, checking on them occasionally, my mind racing even though my body felt still. Nothing else happened that night. But I didn't sleep much. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to find logical explanations. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe one of them stirred and the sound woke the other. Maybe kids just wake up sometimes. And my brain was connecting dots that didn't need to be connected. But no explanation fully satisfied me. The thing that stayed with me most was how calm it all was. There was no fear in the moment. No chaos. Just a quiet disturbance, a gentle waking, and then news of a death. It felt less like something breaking into the world and more like something passing through it. I don't claim to know what it meant. I don't know if it was some kind of awareness children have that adults lose. I don't know if it was coincidence wrapped in grief. I don't know if it was just my mind trying to find meaning in loss. All I know is that both children woke up at the same time, for no clear reason, right after their great-grandmother died. That detail has never left me. Even now, when I think about that night, I don't feel fear. I feel something quieter, on something heavier. A sense that maybe life and death brush past us more often than we realize. And sometimes the people who are most sensitive to it are the ones who can't explain it yet. That night didn't change how I see the world in a dramatic way. It just added a question. And sometimes the questions stay longer than the answers ever could. I was 15 when this happened, and it's the first time I can honestly say that something truly unexplainable occurred to me. I've had plenty of strange moments before and after, but this one stands out in a way the others don't. Maybe it's because someone else saw it too. Maybe it's because of how quiet and subtle it was. Or maybe it's because it happened in a place I thought I knew better than anywhere else in the world. Before I get into what happened, it's important to explain how our basement was set up, because the layout matters more than you might think. Our basement was basically one large room. When you walked down the stairs, you entered an open area that formed a sort of L shape. At the bottom of the stairs was the main living space, and then the room wrapped around a corner into a small kitchen nook. And the kitchen nook wasn't fully hidden from the rest of the basement. You couldn't see all of it from the couch, but you could definitely see into it if you turned your head just slightly. At the bottom of the stairs, we had a TV and two couches positioned side by side. Both couches faced the TV, which meant they were facing away from the kitchen nook, but the nook was still in your peripheral vision if you looked to the side. In the kitchen nook itself, there was a small sink and a mirror mounted on the wall just above it. The mirror wasn't large, but it was big enough to clearly reflect movement in that area. There were also two small windows in the basement. They were narrow and set high, not the kind that let in much light. Even during the day, the basement stayed dim. At night, especially, the windows were almost useless, and whatever light came through them was faint and scattered. That night, my friend Catechins was over. We had known each other for a long time, and we both loved scary things. Horror movies, creepy shows, ghost stories, all of it. We weren't easily startled, and we definitely weren't the type to freak out over nothing. We were watching a TV show called Harper's Island. It was a murder mystery, not extremely scary, but fun and a little tense. The kind of show that keeps you interested without making you jump out of your skin. We had decided to do a mini marathon and had already watched about 5 episodes. By the time this happened, it was around 1 in the morning. The house was quiet, everyone else was asleep, and we were the only ones awake. The basement felt calm, familiar, and safe. We had been laughing, talking, and enjoying the show. Nothing felt off, nothing felt creepy. If anything, it was just another normal night hanging out with a friend. At some point, we ran out of popcorn. I volunteered to go make more. It didn't feel like a big deal at all. I stood up from the couch and started walking toward the stairs. It was only 4 or 5 steps from the couch to the bottom of the staircase. As I took those steps, something made me glance over toward the kitchen nook. I still don't know why I looked. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a feeling of fear. It was just an instinct, like my eyes were pulled in that direction without me consciously deciding to look. As soon as I glanced over, I saw it. In the mirror above the sink, I saw a shadow moving slowly across the glass. It wasn't fast. It wasn't sudden. It was slow and deliberate, like the shadow of a person walking past the mirror. I froze. My first thought was that someone else must be in the house, but that didn't make sense. Everyone was asleep upstairs. No one should have been in the basement with us. The house was locked, and even if someone had been outside, there was no way for a shadow from outside to be reflected so clearly in that mirror. The windows were too small, and the angle was wrong. Then I thought maybe it was my own shadow. But that explanation fell apart immediately. The shadow was moving in the opposite direction from me. And more importantly, it kept moving after I stopped. I had completely frozen in place, yet the shadow continued to slide slowly across the mirror, as if whatever was casting it hadn't stopped at all. It didn't have clear features. It wasn't sharp or detailed. It had just a dark shape, unmistakably moving, unmistakably real. I didn't scream. I didn't say anything. I turned my head slowly and looked at Catikins. She was already looking at me. There was no confusion on her face, no questioning, just recognition. The kind of look that tells you someone else has seen exactly what you just saw. Without saying a single word, we both stood up and walked out of the basement. We didn't run. We didn't panic. We just left. We went upstairs to my room and shut the door behind us. Only once we were safely upstairs did we really start to breathe again. Even then, we didn't talk about it. Not right away. It was like neither of us wanted to be the first to say it out loud. We stayed up for a while, doing anything we could to distract ourselves, talking about random things, sitting in silence, us pretending everything was normal. For weeks after that night, we didn't bring it up. It wasn't because we forgot. We both remembered it clearly. But there was something about it that made it hard to talk about. Saying it out loud would have made it more real, more permanent, and neither of us knew what to do with that. When we finally did talk about it, the conversation was short but intense. We both described the same thing, the same shadow, the same slow movement across the mirror, the same moment of realizing it couldn't be explained. Neither of us added details the other hadn't already seen. There were no differences in our memories, no conflicting perspectives. We had both witnessed the exact same event, and neither of us had an explanation for it. That house had other strange moments, things that made you pause, feel watched, feel uneasy for no clear reason. But this one stayed with me more than any of the others. Maybe because it was so subtle. Maybe because it didn't announce itself with noise or fear. It just existed for a moment and then was gone. Nothing bad happened afterward. There were no footsteps, no voices, no repeat events that night. The basement went back to being just a basement. But something about that shadow never left me. Even now, years later, I can still see it in my mind. The way it moved. The way it didn't belong. The way my friend and I silently agreed that whatever we had just seen was not normal. I don't know what it was. I don't know where it came from. And I don't know why it showed itself for just that brief moment. All I know is that I wasn't alone when it happened. And sometimes that makes it even harder to explain away.
Thank you for spending your night with me. I hope these lullabies stay with you, but not too close. If you found these stories chilling, please like the video and subscribe to join the family. Every comment and sub helps us keep the darkness growing. Get as comfortable as you can, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Sweet dreams.